Turok. Seeds of Doom. By Michael Titelborn. Prologue. The story so far. Our previous tale of Turok opened with Karl Firezid, locked in a life-or-death struggle against vicious creatures known as the Fireborns. The Fireborns were just one type of mutant dinosaur that had inhabited the lost land of Guyana. Like all Turoks before and after him, Karl carried a fringed leather satchel, known as the Light Burden. This seemingly empty bag is filled with the energy source that opens the portal between Earth and Guyana. It also gives Turok warriors access to an almost infinite arsenal of weapons, magical objects, and powers. Karl Firezid wore the Heart of Fire talisman, which helped protect him from the Fireborn's lava-hot, boiling blood. A normal man would have been burned to death in an instant, but Karl fought bravely, despite his injuries. Only when the battle was over and the last Fireborn had been killed did Karl realize his injuries were fatal. Using the folding eye device from the Light Burden, a device that enables Turoks to see various portals throughout the universe, Karl returned to Earth. His final mission being to pass the mantle to the next in line, his nephew, Joshua Firezid. Joshua, a 17-year-old high school senior, was a handsome, popular, and talented athlete. The last thing Josh wanted or expected was for the burden of Turok to fall on his shoulders. But when his uncle Karl returned to Earth on the brink of death, young Joshua had no choice but to inherit the Light Burden and the mantle of Turok. The power of the Light Burden was able to transport Josh, along with his wisecracking, brainy best buddy, 17-year-old Barry Hackowitz, and his 15-year-old, tragically hip sister, Allison, to the savage Lost Land. There, Josh was forced to learn the ways of a Turok and discover the weapons in the Light Burden. After doing battle with such deadly creatures as T-Rex dinosaurs, huge flying trinodons, and giant cave spiders, Josh met Ardorn, the speaker of Forever Light. Ardorn, a holographic image, serves as spokesperson for the Council of Voices, the ruling body of the Safelands. Through Ardorn, and the dying words of his uncle Karl, Josh learned that the greatest danger ever to arise in the Lost Land now threatens Earth. Primogen, a being from another universe, whose interdimensional time travel accidentally created Guyana, as bits and pieces of other universes attached themselves to the huge energy source he carried. Primogen's only desire is to return home. Unfortunately, leaving Guyana would tear apart the very core of the Lost Land, Earth, and all existing universes. The only thing preventing Primogen from powering up his light ship are 12 energy totems, created centuries ago by the Council of Voices. These totems provide energy for cities and villages in the Lost Land, while at the same time preventing Primogen from channeling the energy to his ship. It is now up to Ardorn to lead Josh, Barry, and Allison on a quest. They must journey throughout Guyana to seize and safeguard the energy totems before Primogen's hordes possess them. Book 2 opens as we find Josh ready to enter battle with one of the dregs of Lost Land society, known as the Campaigner. Although not a minion of Primogen, the Campaigner is a rabid survivalist. He often stages battles in his arena, forcing the more feeble creatures of the Lost Land into combat. Josh decides to strike a bargain with the campaigner. If the young Turok agrees to defeat 4 foes, which would be handpicked by the campaigner, then he will be allowed to take the totems. However, when Barry and Allison sneak into the arena to watch Josh fight, they are captured by the campaigner's guards. Now Josh must fight the powerful campaigner himself. The lives of his sister and best friend, and the existence of all known worlds, are hanging in the balance. Chapter 1. Joshua Firezid tucked his body into a tight ball, and rolled out of the way, as the campaigner's massive frame sailed through the air toward him. Josh knew that if the campaigner's immense bulk were to land on him with full force, he would be joining his ancestors sooner than he'd planned. Luckily, the campaigner's huge body crashed to the ground just inches from Josh's head. Josh watched as the campaigner slowly struggled to get up. If he had ever been a human, it was difficult to see those traces now. His flesh was swollen and rotting, and most of his limbs and organs seemed to have been grafted on from the bodies of fallen dinosaurs. He stood at least 7 feet tall, his feet were 3-toed talons, and his skin was rancid, pus-soaked, and green from head to toe. The crowd in the campaigner's arena was a combination of the Lost Lands aristocracy who watched from elevated boxes above the arena, and the hapless prisoners, known as fodder, who were brought up from holding cells beneath the arena. Josh understood how cruel it was that the fodder were made to watch a sport in which they would soon be the participants. Both groups, however, chanted for Turok's defeat. It didn't make matters any easier for the young warrior to know that his sister, Allison, and his best friend Barry, were now hanging upside down above the center of the arena. If Josh lost this fight, or if he refused to play by the rules, and disabled the campaigner rather than killing him, then Barry, Allison, and Josh would all be put to death. If Josh were victorious, he would leave the arena not only with his sister and friend, but also with the energy totem he had come for in the first place. While the campaigner struggled to raise his massive hulk off the floor, Josh took a quick second to look around the arena. He hadn't seen so many skulls with their flesh ripped off since his last trip to a novelty shop. The difference this time, of course, was that the skulls were real. And if he weren't careful, his skull would be the very newest addition to the campaigner's collection. Shaking off the horror of his surroundings, Josh stuck his hand into the light burden, the fringed satchel that mystically connected Turok with an almost infinite arsenal of weapons. He searched for a weapon that might help him create a distraction. But at that moment, thunderous applause filled the air, as the campaigner finally rose to his feet. "You are unlike the Turoks who have been here before, you are a coward," snarled the campaigner. "Not only do you run away, but you are afraid to kill or be killed. I told you before, campaigner, I won't kill for your entertainment," Josh declared, trying to sound as brave and defiant as possible. "That, however, is the problem with all of you Turoks, you have a misplaced respect for life, even the lives of the weak. Well, your moral stance doesn't apply here. By not killing your first 3 opponents, you have dishonored them. To win against me, you have to play by the rules of the arena, live to fight. Fight to live." Josh looked up at the glowing, pulsating energy totem. Then he glanced over at Barry and Allison and, realizing exactly what was at stake, he took a deep breath and replied, "I understand." The campaigner eyed Josh warily. "Only one participant walks away from any battle in my arena," he stated. "Just in case you are the least bit unclear about what is required of you." The campaigner gestured to one of his henchmen. Josh watched a trapdoor open in the floor of the arena, and a platform rise into the air. Standing on the platform were the three opponents Josh had previously faced and defeated in his first 3 arena battles: the flesh-eating sentinel called Ripscar, the Perlin mutant known as Goliath, and the yellow-skinned gladiator with the snake's head. Believing that a Turok does not kill without cause, Josh had refused to take the lives of his defeated adversaries. "What are they doing here, campaigner?" Josh said, noting the look of fear in their eyes. "I've already beaten them, I won't fight them again." Josh's voice trailed off as the campaigner signaled to his squadron of elite guards, who stood among the body parts that hung from the arena's walls. "There will be no need for that," the campaigner answered flatly. Each elite guard notched an arrow into his bow, pulled back on the bowstring, and let the arrow fly. They sliced through the air, landing deep in the chests of the 3 defeated creatures. Their bodies shattered, then crumpled to the ground, their blood seeping out onto the platform. "To the death, Turok," the campaigner said, as he signaled the archers to train their bows on Barry and Allison. "Anything less and you and your friends will share their fate." Josh looked at all the fleshless heads ringing the wall. He was in no burning hurry to join the fallen gladiators on permanent display. "Let the next battlefield be prepared," the campaigner ordered. Suddenly, stone scraped against stone, and flinty sparks crackled in the air. The floating platforms were 5 feet across and 2 feet thick, hovering hundreds of feet in the air. Resting on each platform was a different weapon of battle, the campaigner's way of evening the odds against the inexhaustible weaponry that was contained within Turok's light burden satchel. Despite his bulk, the campaigner leaped across several platforms, causing each one to bob slightly, and landed close to Josh, who was crouched on a separate floating platform a few yards away. "The next battlefield is ready," Turok the campaigner announced. "Are you ready?" Josh said, while taking deep breaths, trying to drown out the chanting and catcalling of the spectators. The aristocrats of Galiana called out wagers from their lofty seats, betting on how long Josh would last. Sizing up the campaigner, Josh kind of wondered that himself. The campaigner then reached down and grabbed a weapon at his feet. A spray of automatic rifle fire spit through the air before ripping up the ground next to Josh. Backflipping, Turok somersaulted off the platform and landed onto another one nearby. Looking back in the direction of the campaigner, Josh saw that the warlord was holding a smoking submachine gun. "Then let's begin," the campaigner said. His laughter filled the arena. Josh reached into the light burden for a weapon. A small charge of static electricity surged up his arm, as it always did when he reached into the bag. He withdrew a tech bow from the pouch, and faster than the eye could follow, he let fly an energy-charged tech arrow. The arrow exploded in a corona of blue fire all around the campaigner. The charge from one arrow could put down a normal man for many hours, or even kill him if it penetrated his body. But as the energy dissipated, Josh saw that the campaigner was not only still standing, he was clutching the shaft of the arrow in his festering hand, something that should have been impossible. "You'll have to do better than that, Turok," the campaigner barked. "I can see your head on my wall already." Again, the campaigner leaped into the air. This time he landed 5 platforms away from Josh. The force of his landing sent the platforms crashing into one another, setting off a domino effect that built in intensity until the platform next to Josh rammed into his, shattering it. As Josh tumbled through the air, he reached into the light burden and withdrew a grappling hook and some rope. Swinging the grapple, he hooked it onto the base of another platform. Then he began climbing upward as he dangled from the rope. The campaigner jumped to the very next platform, picked up several knives, and bellowed, "How about a little target practice, Turok?" The knives whizzed past Josh's head as he twisted and swung back and forth out of the way. The swinging made his climb more difficult. He was about halfway up the rope when one blade made contact. It impacted on his wood and rawhide chest shield, but glanced off. Of all the weapons and talismans he possessed as Turok, his breastplate protected him better than anything else. The ricocheting knife did slice his left arm, though, knocking his hands loose from the rope. Racked with pain, Josh's lead hand spasmed, and he lost his grip. Floundering, he found himself hanging upside down, the rope twisted around his ankle. He felt the tendons in his leg strain as the full weight of his body pulled his hip muscle to its limits. The crowd went wild, screaming for blood. They tossed stones and strange objects at the dangling Turok. Somehow managing to keep the satchel upright, Josh reached into the light burden again. He withdrew a Roman candle and a lighter. Igniting the fuse, he aimed the firecracker at the campaigner and turned his face away. A blast of orange, red, and green phosphors leaped from the muzzle of the Roman candle, filling the air with color. "Ag!" screamed the campaigner, covering his eyes and stumbling back from the edge of the platform. Using his one good hand, Josh righted himself on the rope and shimmied the rest of the way back up to the battle platform. The campaigner was still trying to recover from the blast when Josh bounded into the air with his left foot extended in a flying kick pose. The arc of his kick was carrying him within striking distance of planting a blow on the back of the campaigner's neck. Suddenly, the campaigner whirled around and grabbed Turok's foot, stopping him dead in the air. "Oh, you're good, boy," said the hideous warrior who looked like a patchwork of brutality and death. Turok felt only disgust as he watched the slime from the campaigner's sores ooze along his throat and over his chest as he spoke. "But you are just that, a boy. Sparkling lights are no substitute for real weapons and skill." Then he slammed Josh down, while he wrenched free a huge, razor-sharp knife that was lodged into the platform. "I think I'll wear your ears on my belt," he said, as he slowly raised the knife over Turok's head. Chapter 2. This doesn't look good. Barry Hackowitz called out to Josh's sister, Allison. He struggled to keep his glasses from falling off his face, which wasn't easy considering both he and Allison were hanging upside down. The blood was starting to rush to his head. He felt as though he was about to black out. "Try to have a little confidence," Barry Allison said, as she also struggled against her ropes, keeping a careful eye on the sentry watching them from a nearby tower. "Confidence," he cried. "I wouldn't need confidence if you hadn't rushed to the arena even though Ardorn and Josh asked us to stay put in the hovercraft." "So now you're saying this is all my fault," replied Allison accusingly. "Now I'm saying it. News flash. This has been your fault from moment one," Allison Barry shot back. "I should start calling you Cleopatra, Queen of Denial. You know that we shouldn't have been fooling with Josh's magic bag in the first place. Bottom line, Josh and Ardorn both told us to stay behind while they got the energy totems from the campaigner." "Whoa," said Allison, swinging her arms to the side, scratching the side of Barry's face with one of her fingers. "Back up, Brainiac boy. Like, I wanted to stay behind and be eaten by some dinosaur thing? No thanks. And besides, who was it who said this was as good as a vacation in Fort Lauderdale?" "Nothing in Fort Lauderdale ever tried to eat me," said Barry. "You just don't hang out in the right places," quipped Allison. "I'm so glad you find this all so funny," Barry said, jerking his body away from Allison's. "The next time I'm hanging upside down in an alien arena about to become a Hackowitz McNugget for a drooling lizard, remind me not to do it, okay? Any ideas on how we're going to get out of here?" "Hope Josh wins," she replied meekly. "Wonderful," Barry moaned sarcastically as he twisted his body to get a better look at the battle platforms. "That makes me feel so much better." Meanwhile, Josh was just a little short of confidence himself at the moment. On top of everything, he was disappointed that, in what seemed to be the final moments of his life, nothing flashed in front of his eyes. He was glad the feeling in his left arm was returning. And none too soon, he thought as the campaigner's knife came hurtling down toward his face. Almost instinctively, Turok jerked both hands together, slapping them on either side of the blade, stopping it less than an inch from his nose. The campaigner grunted as he leaned forward on one foot. He struggled to shove the knife into Josh's throat, but Turok held steady. Then, with a twist of his shoulders, Josh got a bit of leverage, and rolled the behemoth off him and toward the edge of the platform. Losing his balance, the campaigner crashed with a fleshy thud to the platform below. A cheer went up from one section of the arena. The campaigner shot a look in that direction, and without a word guards posted along the turrets opened fire, killing everyone in that section whether they were cheering or not. After a moment of silence, the crowd started chanting, "Death to Turok! Death to Turok!" "Wonderful way to breed loyalty," Josh said, scrambling to his feet. "Whatever works," said the campaigner, lobbing a grenade at his opponent. Josh swiftly pulled a baseball bat from the light burden, and hit the grenade, sending it arcing off into the distance. The explosion shook the arena, causing the campaigner to rock backwards. Reaching into the light burden again, Josh withdrew 2 items, a vaulting pearl and the folding eye. An opaque lens about 3 inches across, the folding eye was a mystical Turok talisman that allowed Josh to see the openings known as fold gates. The openings connected to each other and linked Earth to the Lost Land. They never closed up but could only be seen through the folding eye. Strapping it on, Josh could see that there was a fold gate opening hovering above the next platform, and another just behind the campaigner. If he ran toward the first gate he would be directly in the campaigner's sight, which was exactly what Turok was counting on. Hefting the vaulting pearl right onto his shoulder, Josh ran toward the campaigner, who had already pulled the pin on another grenade. Rather than risk Josh hitting this one out of range before it detonated, he held onto the explosive for an extra moment. Just as Josh planted the pearl and launched himself into the air for what looked like a frontal assault, the campaigner lobbed the grenade. The crowd gasped as the base of the pearl and platform both shattered from the blast. Out of control, Josh tumbled through the air toward the campaigner, then suddenly vanished. What the crowd did not see was Josh entering the fold gate opening. To them, it seemed as if Josh had simply disappeared into thin air. Almost instantaneously, and still moving with all the force of his vault, Josh reappeared through a fold gate opening directly behind the campaigner. Turok slammed into the brute's back, sending them both tumbling off the platform hundreds of feet below toward certain death. In a small room, in a back hallway off of the campaigner's arena, Ardorn sat cross-legged with her eyes closed, meditating. A bioelectric life form who was uploaded from a complex computer program, Ardorn had the awesome responsibility of leading Josh and the others on their dangerous quest to gather the Council's energy totems. The Council of Voices ruled the Safelands, the only protected area in the savage Lost Land, and had done so for hundreds of years. Though their bodies were stored in stasis tanks, their minds were connected through cables that absorbed and relayed their thoughts and emotions. Ardorn was their link. She gave voice to their minds. At the moment, Ardorn's own mind was troubled. The fates of both Earth and Galiana were in the hands of a new Turok, a brash, untrained 17-year-old, who was now engaged in a life-or-death struggle with the campaigner on the battlefield just out of Ardorn's sight. She wondered if the young warrior could rise to the task and save everything she had ever known. Letting her body go limp, her eyes rolled back in her head as she reached out to form a direct connection with the Council of Voices. Ardorn became pure energy and light. She seemed almost to disappear, and she melded with the strong energy force within the room. As their speaker, Ardorn was more than just the eyes and ears of the Council. She also possessed all their knowledge of the past and the present, and glimpses of the future to come. "Hear me, Council," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. As she spoke, her physical form slowly flickered in and out. She sensed the Council contacting her. Each made his presence felt in turn. The minds of the 4 beings, 1 human, 1 dinosaur, and 2 aliens, reached out from their star-seized tanks across the lost land. The faces of the council passed before her, and hovered just outside her reach, in an area of cascading color and texture. Why do you call us, speaker of forever light? The end of all things threatens this world, and all other worlds, Ardorn said through a combination of words and thought. This new Turok has yet to stop the darkness from blotting out the light. The darkness advances. The campaigner is a fierce foe. This Turok is young and inexperienced. I fear he will not be able to defeat the campaigner. And unlike some Turoks before him, he is unwilling to kill. I seek your wisdom. Ardorn intuitively received the collective mind of the council. The Turoks are the protectors. Faith in the Turok is faith in us. The child of the Forsaken One will prevail, with your aid. Stand by his side and aid him. But he is rash, and too much like his father, John, the Forsaken One. The secondary Turok, Karl, could have stood against Primogen. But this young one. All our fates rest with him. He is greater than he knows. Perhaps greatest of all times past and to come. Help him to see this, Ardorn, or we are all lost. The room, and Ardorn, then ebbed back into view. Ardorn opened her eyes to find herself sitting alone, on the floor. She knew that the council was right. Josh was the Turok now. He was not his father, or his uncle. If Primogen could be stopped, it would be by his hand. But first Turok had to beat the campaigner. Standing up and opening the door, Ardorn went into the arena, and took her seat among the wildly cheering spectators. Josh and the campaigner fell together through the air. The campaigner flashed a smile filled with rotting teeth. So we will both die today, Turok, he snarled. I am prepared to die. Are you? To his own amazement, Josh calmly ignored the campaigner. Instead, he flipped down the folding eyepiece, and searched for a portal. Even though he was falling rapidly toward the ground, Turok spotted an opening about 10 feet ahead. Quickly, he formed a plan that he hoped would save his, and the campaigner's, lives. Neither of us have to die, Josh stated boldly. Turok twisted his body, then drifted into the fold gate opening, dragging the campaigner after him through the portal. Being on the other side of a fold gate opening is like being in all places at the same time. Josh and the campaigner could see the arena, and all of the lost lands, but in an odd, funhouse mirror kind of way. All around, other gates opened and closed like blinking shutters. The reality of solid dimensions, just outside their reach. A fold gate could open anywhere, into the bottom of the ocean or into the heart of a sun. The trick, as Josh was beginning to understand, was a matter of stepping through the right opening, at the right time. The sights of all the points of time and space rushing by badly rattled the campaigner. This was just fine with Josh, as it gave him a chance to zero in on an opening that he believed was rapidly approaching, one that would return him to the arena, just 2 feet above the ground. If Josh was wrong, however, His reign as Turok would be among the briefest in the legacy's 2,000-year-old history. Twisting the tremendous form of the campaigner toward the portal, Josh gave him a firm shove. They emerged through the opening, and hit the ground from a height of 2 feet. To the audience in the arena, they seemed to have reappeared a mere second after they vanished. Crashing and tumbling, the two spun to a halt. The campaigner shook his head, trying to refocus after such an intense experience. He tried to sit up, but felt the cold edge of a knife pressed against his throat. In the split second it took the campaigner time to recover, Josh had managed to pull a large curved knife, with a jewel-encrusted handle from the light burden. He now had the weapon pressed against the metallic rotting flesh of the campaigner's throat. "See, we're not dead. At least, you're not. Not yet. You have the upper hand, Turok. Finish the fight. It is the only way to win. It is the rule of the arena. If you don't kill me, I'll kill you." "I don't think so," said Josh, reaching up and taking off the folding eye. "You're going to give me the totem, and let me and my friends go? And do it all with a smile?" "And if I don't?" replied the campaigner defiantly. Then Josh said, pressing the folding eye to the campaigner's eye, and twisting his head to the side, "I push you through there." The campaigner, looking through the mystic lens, saw a fold gate not 5 inches from his head, and utter darkness beyond. "And you go through the whole thing over and over again. You'll wish you were dead, but you won't know how to die." The great hulking mass let out a hiss of dismay. "Very well," the campaigner said, twisting his head to the side so that he would not have to look through the lens anymore. "But you dishonor me with defeat. You dishonor me even more by not killing me." "Not my problem," Josh said, standing and placing the folding eye right back on the bandana over his eye. "Live with it." As Josh walked toward his friends, the campaigner scrambled to his feet, and rushed Turok from behind. Josh, aware that the campaigner would never give up of his own free will, was fully expecting this treachery. He listened for the thundering footfalls behind him. Just as the depraved warlord was about to hit him full force, Josh dropped to the ground, sending the campaigner careening over his back, right into the very fold gate opening Josh had just pointed out. "Hey!" Barry shouted from above the arena, as the floating platforms descended to the ground. "Where'd he go?" Peering through the folding eye, Josh looked up at his friend. "Believe me, Bud," he said, "you don't want to know." Chapter 3. Beneath the campaigner's arena lay a huge pit, a holding pen filled with humans, humanoids, and dinosaurs. These were the fodder who would soon do battle. The fodder was there for the entertainment of the spectators. They had been torn from their homes, and families awaiting their turn to die in the campaigner's arena. They were prisoners, who despised their captor with every fiber of their beings. Some had been there for years, thinking of nothing but what they would do if they ever get their hands on the despicable despot for just a second. Suddenly a crackling sound like static electricity filled the air. The prisoners turned and saw what appeared to be a giant blob drop out of thin air. The campaigner landed with a thud. As the prisoners advanced on him with murder in their eyes, the campaigner searched for a way to escape. He was shocked when the creatures stopped their charge and pointed at his face. Reaching up, the gnarled green claws of the campaigner's hand touched the exposed circuits and wires on his face, and it became clear to him what horrified the creatures. When he landed after falling through the fold gate, the synthetic skin on his face had been torn, exposing his robot insides. The prisoners were startled, trying to make sense of the fact that their tormentor was a robot. Then, quickly, it ceased to matter. This was the campaigner dumped into their laps, and they would never get a chance like this again. As they ripped his arms and legs from his body and began disemboweling his mechanized innards, the pain sensors sent feedback through the campaigner's artificial nerve endings. The skin might have been fake, but the pain was all too real. As Josh cut Allison and Barry loose from their ropes, a scream like nothing they had ever heard before echoed up from the bowels of the arena. Then suddenly, the screaming stopped. Meanwhile, the two prisoners who had been lowered to the ground by two of the tower sentries were free, released when the campaigner disappeared. "What was that?" Allison asked, rubbing her wrists. "If we're lucky," Justice said Josh. "Come on, let's go find Ardorn, get the energy totem, and get out of here." "Turok," shouted a man dressed in a Civil War soldier's uniform. "What?" Josh asked, turning to face the soldier. Barry and Allison froze alongside Josh. "My name is Captain James Dunlap, Confederate Army and Captain of the Guard for the campaigner." "You're human," said Josh, sounding very surprised. "From Earth?" "Yes," replied Dunlap. "I was a soldier in the Civil War, held in a prisoner of war camp. The Turok at that time, Talset, sent me here, to Galena. I am now next in line to be the campaigner." "Wonderful," replied Josh. "Just the man I wanted to see. As you can see, I've defeated your commander, and by the terms of our agreement, you have to release me and my friends, and surrender the energy totem to me." "I'm afraid I can't do that," replied the captain. "Why not?" asked Barry. "Those were the rules." "Because, as the next campaigner in line, I must challenge you, Turok." The captain then withdrew his saber from its scabbard, and held it before him. "Give me a break," thought Josh, reaching into the light burden, and withdrawing a palm-sized weapon. Pressing a button on the side, two metal prongs connected to thin wires ejected from the front of the device, and impaled themselves in the captain's chest. Electricity from the prongs ripped through the air, gripping the captain in a paralyzing, spasmodic hold. Shuddering and jerking, he dropped to the ground, unconscious. "What kind of super-cool Turok weapon was that, oh great protector of everything?" asked Barry, looking over at the device in Josh's hand. "A stun taser, from the LA Police Department," said Josh. "Standard issue?" Then, turning to the crowd, Josh yelled, "Anyone else?" There were no takers. Ardorn joined the trio. "You could have dispatched this man and the campaigner much more easily if you had simply killed them," she stated. "I won't become a killer," Ardorn, replied Josh. I told you that before. We should retrieve the energy totem and get on to the next location before Primogen's troops catch up with us, Ardorn said, not wishing to continue her ongoing debate with Turok. A few minutes later, the subsonic roar of air rushing through the hovercraft's jets filled the arena as the energy totem was loaded into Ardorn's hovercraft. It's too bad we can't take all those poor prisoners with us, said Josh, as the hovercraft flew off, heading toward the forest. You know that Dunlap is just going to continue this campaigner insanity, and thousands more will die needlessly. It is the way of things in the Lost Land, replied Ardorn. Your agreement was for the energy totem, and nothing more. If those prisoners in the campaigner's arena are to be freed, that will have to wait for another day. Besides, our concerns lie elsewhere. If you are unsuccessful in stopping Primogen, we will all be prisoners of death. Chapter 4. Hours later, a loud cracking, like thousands of reedy stalks being snapped, filled the air as Ardorn attacked Josh. Welts and bruises covered his face and shoulders. The forearm-length staffs moved faster than Allison could follow as she watched her brother feint, parry, block, advance, charge, and retreat. He barely held his own against the 500-year-old teenaged hologram who had become their guide, protector, and, in this fighting session, teacher. Josh had already landed on his butt twice in the hovercraft since Barry started flying the ship, and he was in no hurry to let Ardorn put him down again. Memories of his first day of high school wrestling practice came rushing back. Ardorn's punishment reminded him of Coach Grunt Gordonsey, his 5'6", 250 pounds of pure muscle wrestling teacher. Old Grunt put Josh on the mat twice that first day as well. This makes no sense, Ardorn, Josh said, pinning her two staffs against the side of the hovercraft. With a light burden I can just pull out a rifle and shoot my enemy. Why do I need to improve my fighting skills? Not all challenges can be fought with a bullet, Turok, she replied softly. And a rifle is no good if your enemy is a foot away from you, as I am now. I would never let my enemy get this close, he said, pressing forward. Ardorn released her staffs and flipped into the air, arcing over Josh's head and landing behind him. Before he could respond, her extended left leg swept across the deck, slamming into the backs of Josh's knees. Folding over, Josh landed on his back, the staffs flying out of his hands. Before he could sit up, Ardorn recovered the staffs from the floor of the hovercraft and jabbed the twin pearls to the deck, crisscrossing them over Josh's throat. And nothing will kill you faster than overconfidence. End of lesson. Woo, yelped Allison. Ardorn, you go, girl. Maybe you should be Turok. And maybe you should have stayed behind in the safe lands, said Josh to his sister, sticking out his tongue as they had done to each other their whole lives. Allison stuck out her tongue right back at him, although hers contained a small round silver stud pierced through the tip. Ardorn leaned over and helped Josh to his feet. No, my role is the keeper of the knowledge of the elders, she explained. That knowledge does extend to the mastery of every battle technique and martial art of all the species of the Lost Land, but I am not a fighter. Could have fooled me, said Josh, taking off his bandana and wiping the sweat from the back of his neck. Allison moved forward in the craft to stand next to Barry, who piloted the ship. Does this thing have a CD player? Asked Allison. Sure, replied Barry. I've got some 9-inch nails, Smashing Pumpkins, and Big Bad Voodoo Daddy set to play on random. Cute, replied Allison. Hey, check out this move, guys, shouted Barry as he quickly pulled his hands over the guidance controls and sent the ship flipping front over back. The old loop-the-loop. I perfected it playing Space Killers on my PC. Will you just fly right, Space Commander? Yelled Josh as he picked himself up off the floor yet again. Josh tied his red bandana back around his head. Then he picked up the light burden and stared at the bag that had began this whole adventure. His expression turned serious. Ardorn, he began, since you do possess so much knowledge, I was wondering if you could help me understand a bit more about the light burden. I will try, Ardorn replied. What is it you wish to know, Turok? Well, how does it work, exactly? Josh asked. During the battle, for example, I pulled a Roman candle from the satchel which worked to blind the campaigner, but that wasn't what I was thinking of, not really. I noticed that the campaigner's eyes seemed overly withdrawn, and might be sensitive to light. When I was hanging from the rope, all I wanted to do was somehow blind him, and out came the Roman candle. You begin to understand the potential of the light burden, Turok, and it begins to understand you, Ardorn said critically. This is a promising step. It begins to understand me, repeated Josh. What do you mean, it's alive? There are many ways to define life, Ardorn continued. Your time here in Guyana has surely shown you that. But no, the light burden is not alive as you might imagine. More accurately, the energy pocket within the bag is connected to you and to all Turoks who have ever been or ever will be. Josh rubbed his head. Now you've lost me. Ardorn stood and picked up her staff, then indicated for Josh to do the same. The two took identical battle stances with their weapons and went through a series of thrust and attack postures. Ardorn was amazed to see how fast Josh had picked up on the basic moves of Tibetan stick fighting as he matched her, move for move. It is what opens the portals between universes, Ardorn went on, and in a way, it contains a small part of every universe that has ever been, existing at all times and places at once. Josh whirled and snatched the staffs from Ardorn's hands before she could stop him. See, you understand more than you think, said Ardorn, smiling. Both you and the light burden are more alive for being with the other, less alive apart. It is the most treasured gift of the Turok, to carry with them a piece of forever, and to glimpse through it to the far-reaching expanses of infinity. I envy you. Well, I don't envy me, he said, as he tossed the staffs onto the deck. My lack of experience almost got Barry and Allison killed back there. And now the survival of this place, Earth, and whatever else exists throughout infinity hinges on my getting all the energy totems before Primogen gets them. But your friend and your sister are not dead, Ardorn pointed out, and you have one more of the Council's energy totems. They have faith in you. I have faith in you. You are the Turok, and all our salvation is in your hands. You will be equal to the task, and if I can help you in any way, I will. Thanks, Ardorn said Josh. But I have one more question. Hold on, Ardorn said, growing visibly tense. Stepping over next to Barry, Ardorn swept a hand across the controls. The hovercraft slowed to a halt, bobbing in midair just above a ridge of trees. We're here. Barry and Allison looked over the sides of the craft, at the tops of the branches and leaves. And where is here, exactly? Asked Barry. The North Fork of the River of Souls, Ardorn answered, slowly guiding the craft down through the branches. Once clear of the crown of the trees, the threesome could see a massive river stretching out as far as the eye could see, as wide as one of the Great Lakes, snaking off beyond the horizon. We have to go back down into that stink pool, moaned Allison, clicking her tongue stud against her teeth. Wasn't it enough we almost died down there last time? There's nothing down there but death, anyway, right? You might think so, Ardorn replied, but something miraculous happened here 100,000 years ago. As the Council of Voices strove to keep Primogen from escaping by erecting the energy totems throughout the Lost Land, they chose to place 2 here. What better place to hide such awesome objects of power than in a region of Guyana that most creatures avoid? Yes, it is plagued with death and pestilence. We retrieved the first totem from Zuckus's village. This second marker not only served to keep Primogen locked in his light ship, it is a shining example of perfection and hope for the few unfortunates who still reside here. The Council soon realized that prolonged exposure to this second totem energies had altered the river for the better in this section as well. Plants grew at a remarkable rate, and the waters even helped heal the sick and dying. It wasn't long before another city, smaller but similar to Zuckus's city, rose up around the stream. People came from far and wide to partake of the healing waters. Let me guess, said Josh. I'm sure the people here also came to regard the totem as some kind of religious sign. You are correct, Turok said Ardorn, as she quickly surveyed the lay of the land. The craft penetrated deeper into the trees. Like the big monolith in the movie 2001, said Barry. Dum, 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 the dum, he sang out, mimicking the music from one of his favorite films. The other 3 just stared at him. Well, it's no 9-inch nails, smashing pumpkins, or big bad voodoo daddy, said Barry. But it's got a good beat. Ardorn stared at Barry with confusion, then continued with her story. Such a secret could not stay safe forever, and the river's power eventually came to the attention of Primogen. The waters here have recently returned to their poisonous state, though the totem still stands. No one knows why. The Council fears that somehow Primogen's efforts are to blame. In this unstable time, they fear he may choose to take an all-out offensive to get the totem. Then we have to stop him, said Barry, causing everyone, including Ardorn, to turn to look at him. "What?" he yelped defensively. "I know what all this means to Earth, and every place else. And I want to help." "Private Barry Hackowitz reporting for duty, sir." "I like it when you show some spine," Barry Allison said, whacking Barry on the back. "Maybe I could be like Turok Jr., or something," Barry said, smiling. "Don't push it, bud," said Josh, giggling under his breath. "Your enthusiasm is appreciated," said Ardorn. "We are all going to have to do our best if we want to stop Primogen." She steered the hovercraft deeper into the jungle, along the snaking bends of the river. He's had millions of years to subconsciously plan for this moment. I doubt that anything that has happened so far has been a surprise to him. This is just the beginning of our task. Ardorn's words hung heavily in the air as the hovercraft eased along, pushing aside the foliage as they went. The jungle around the River of Souls was truly a sight to behold. Flowers and ripe fruits of all varieties abounded, some as large as human heads, but all in vibrant and electric colors. "Ardorn," asked Allison as she reached out for a beach ball-sized apple, "do you think these are safe to eat?" "Allison!" Ardorn shouted upon seeing her leaning over the edge of the craft. "Get back inside the craft before." Without warning, a rustling sound shot through the branches, as if something was running along the tops of the trees. Before anyone could move, 3 hairy arms grabbed Allison and hauled her over the edge of the hovercraft. In a split second, she was gone. Chapter 5. Allison. Josh shouted, looking over the edge of the hovercraft, his tech bow instantly pulled from the light burden and strung with 3 tech arrows. I only had my back turned for a second. "What grabbed her?" "I didn't get a good look at them," said Ardorn, "but the skin and hair seemed to be that of the hunters, the bloodhound caste of the Throwbacks." "Throwbacks?" asked Barry. "Dinosaurs that are purposely bred and trained to be the most merciless, vicious, brutal killers in the dinosaur armies," answered Ardorn. "If your sister was taken by one of them, Turok, I fear that there is nothing there," Josh said, pointing. "To the right, I can see the branches moving in a path, like something making a beeline along the edge of the river. We need to go that way." "Turok, your sister is—" "I heard you the first time," Ardorn Josh said, taking his eyes off the woods for the first time since his sister was taken, "and I say my sister is still alive. If these hunters are following the call of the Dinosaur armies, then they are in the service of Primogen, which means our mission should take us this way, anyway. So we go this way, understood?" Ardorn gritted her jaw tight and locked glares with Josh. She could see he was not going to be swayed. "Understood, Turok." Ardorn then turned back to the controls, piloting the craft down the River of Souls. "You and Allison shouldn't even be out here," Barry Josh mumbled. "If anything happens to her," Josh's voice trailed off as he turned back to search the treetops for signs of Allison. "Hey, bud, don't even finish that sentence." "We'll rescue her," Barry said, clapping a hand on Josh's shoulder. "Or my name's not Bruce Willis." "Well, of course, it's not, but—" The twists and turns of the River of Souls straightened out somewhat after a few hundred miles. Barry started to notice makeshift graveyard after graveyard peppering the shoreline on either side. "So many dead, looking for fresh water to drink," he said, covering his nose to keep from gagging on the rancid stench of death and stagnant tidewater. "Boy, a bottled water business in this place would clean up, so to speak." "We should seek out the Segna tribe," said Ardorn. "They still live along the banks here and might have an idea where the hunters took your sister." "Fine," said Josh. "Any idea where they make camp?" "They've been on the move since the river went foul again," explained Ardorn. "But their last delegation to the council said they were staying just around the next bend." "Yee yee 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 yee," came a battle cry from the trees. Before Josh could turn and lift his head, 5 human warriors leaped from the leaf cover and unfurled a massive net. Josh, Ardorn, and Barry were wrapped in the net in a matter of seconds, and dragged over the side of the hovercraft, landing roughly on the mossy ground below. The sensors on board the ship picked up the fact that no one was left on board, and the large craft slowed to a stop, hovering above the jungle thicket. On the ground below, Josh pulled a double-headed talon blade from the light burden and sliced through the netting. He was free. A warrior instantly lunged at Josh, brandishing a battle staff. Swinging it down hard, he managed to knock the talon blade from Josh's grip. Thrusting and batting, the enemy warrior assaulted Josh much faster than he could compensate. A ramming blow to his midsection doubled him over, and the enemy warrior moved in for the killing blow. Raising the staff over his head, the warrior swung down. Josh slid to the side, allowing the warrior's overextension and forward motion to carry him past where Josh was kneeling. The warrior's staff burrowed into the soft riverbank mud. Snatching the staff from the warrior, Josh stood and knocked the warrior to the ground with his own weapon. Then he swiftly plunged his hand into the light burden and withdrew a pump-action shotgun. "Hold it right there," Josh said, firing a shotgun blast into the ground next to the warrior. The blast not only froze the warrior in place, it stopped the other members of his attack party, who were coming closer, advancing from the thicket of trees. "You want to explain why you jumped us? You trespassed on Segna land, and brought the wrath of the hunters in your wake," said the warrior, straining to lift himself up on his elbows. As he rose slightly, Josh pushed him back into the mud. "I'd feel a lot more comfortable if you stay right there," Josh said forcefully. "You guys okay?" he shouted over his shoulder to his fallen friends. "We're fine," Josh said. Barry, standing as he and Ardorn slipped out of the shredded netting. "Good," replied Josh. "Now, I have just a few more questions for the light burden," shouted one of the warrior's companions, pointing at the satchel hanging from Josh's side. "He carries the light burden." "Turok," said the warrior on the ground, bounding up and past Josh faster than the eye could follow. Once standing, the man dropped to one knee and covered his face with his hands. "Forgive us, Turok. We did not recognize you." We had heard word of the passing of the secondary. You knew my Uncle Carl? Josh said, while taking the warrior by the arm and helping him back to his feet. The secondary fought, as all Turoks have since the beginning, to preserve freedom among the Segna and all peoples of the Lost Land. I am Kari. My men and I are of the Segna, named for the first Turok, your ancestor. My ancestor? Asked Josh. Pal Segna Sarquin, Joshua said Ardorn, stepping next to Josh. He discovered the Lost Land in 2100 BC. He opened the portal between it and Earth, and that is why your family bears the burden of being Turok. Speaker, said the warrior as he got his first good look at Ardorn, dropping to one knee again. The Council of Voices hears our prayers, and answers them, with your presence. Rise, Kari of Segna said Ardorn. The Turok before you seeks his sister, stolen by a raiding party of hunters. Have you seen them? Josh watched as Kari tried not to meet his gaze. It was as if he were both afraid of him and drawn to him all at the same time. We saw a party moving toward the camp of the Dinosaurs, but did not see if they carried any prisoners. My men and I discovered a slain group of animals nearby. If the hunters have fed recently, there is a good chance the sister of the Turok is still alive. Will the secondary be joining us? Joining us, said Josh, looking from Ardorn to the warrior, still trying to grasp the idea that this warrior's tribe was named for his ancestor from almost 4,000 years ago. Carl, the secondary, is dead. You do know that, don't you? You just said you knew he was dead. Kari tilted his head and looked at Josh, a confused expression on his face. Death means little to the Turoks, surely you know this if you carry the light burden. What the Turok means, Kari, is that the secondary still battles dangers elsewhere in the time before death, said Ardorn, covering for Josh's mistake. Show us the way to the Dinosaur camp, and we will make every effort to drive them from your land. As the warriors retrieved their nets and weapons, they led Barry, Josh, and Ardorn through the woods. Josh and Ardorn hung back. What did he mean, Josh whispered, about Carl joining us here? The bond of the Turoks runs through the light burden, Turok whispered Ardorn. As you can commune with the other Turoks in the gathering place by entering the light burden, so can they come to you in this world when needed. You mean Carl's not dead? Asked Josh, more confused than ever about the whole Turok legacy, and his place in it. He is dead, Turok replied Ardorn. Remember, death and life mean different things here, and different things when it comes to the light burden. It is a gateway, as are the fold gate openings, to different places, times past and times to come. All times exist within it. Kari turned and looked at Josh and smiled. Josh smiled back, unsure of what he should do as the Turok, wave, salute, or give a thumbs up. As they walked on, Josh looked at the double triangle hourglass on the light burden, and wondered if he would ever feel comfortable with the mantle of Turok. Alison Firezid sat in a cage of thatched bamboo and caked mud. She took very little comfort in knowing that the fruit she had been reaching for when the hunters dragged her out of the hovercraft was, indeed, edible. Huge piles of the ripe, juicy fruit sat all around the cage within easy reach. Her appetite had faded, though, in the wake of seeing the piles of human bones stacked like firewood all around the hunter's camp. Why bother fattening herself up for them? "Why don't you eat, fleshling?" said the hunter closest to the cage. "Why don't you eat dirt and die, lizardling?" said Allison, turning her back. "What spark for a fleshling?" cackled the hunter. "You amaze me, little girl. Most fleshlings are silent in our presence." "Yeah, well, I'm not from around here, okay," replied Allison, trying to sound as tough and defiant as she could. She would not go down without a fight. "And where I'm from, lizards like you live in glass tanks in pet stores." "As long as he's talking, he's not eating me," she thought. "You do have spirit," said the creature. "Or perhaps you just don't know how much trouble you're really in." Allison thought about telling him how much trouble he was in, that her brother was Turok, and when he found her, this guy would be smashed into a million little lizard pieces, but after the incident in the campaigner's arena, she thought better of it. She then noticed a scouting party of creatures like the one talking to her, returning to the camp. The one interrogating her went to talk to them. "What do you report?" he asked of the other hunters. The camp was defenseless. "We left a message that the other villagers will not soon forget, and got the location of the energy totem from their lawgiver before we slit her throat. Her blood was hot and tasty." "Excellent," replied the lead hunter. "Primogen will be pleased. Break camp and bring the girl. She should make quite the tasty celebration dinner when we deliver the totem to Primogen." The hunters laughed throaty, phlegm-filled laughs that filled Allison with disgust. Then the fear returned. "Josh, please hurry, wherever you are." Thick, oily smoke choked the air as Josh and his party arrived at the Segna warriors' village. As they passed through the gates, they saw blood stains on the barrier walls, painted in a strange pattern that looked like a language, but it was no writing Josh had ever seen before. "We are too late," said Kari, as his men fanned out to check for survivors. "The hunters have been here." "What does the writing say?" asked Barry. "It says Turok," said the warrior, stepping over to speak with his men. Josh looked around at the charred huts and smashed homes, and at the bloodstains on the camp's gate. "These people are not fighters," he thought. "They just got in the way of Primogen. And he just wants me out of the way so he can get his hands on the precious totems. All this death, for no reason. This is all getting way too creepy," Josh said. Barry, "I'm beginning to think I should have stayed in the Safelands. Right about now I'd be sipping a cool lemonade, playing Space Killers, probably version 1,000,000.0, being fanned by." Josh's look cut Barry's fantasy short. "Of course, being the loyal best friend to the great and powerful Turok, protector of my butt, is lots more fun," Barry concluded. "Thanks," replied Josh. "But I know what you mean about the creepy part. Hang in there, bud. Maybe this will make you feel better, just in case things get even hairier. Josh reached into the light burden and pulled out a plasma cannon, an arm-length rifle-shaped weapon with a muzzle the size of a soccer ball. "Whoa, Rambo, what exactly do I do with this little puppy?" asked Barry, both excited by and terrified of the huge weapon. "And where's the joystick?" "Well, you know how to point and click, right?" asked Josh. "In this case, if someone nasty comes near you, just point and shoot." "I don't know," Josh said Barry. "I'm a pacifist. I oppose all violence, especially violence done to me. In fact, I'm more than a pacifist, I'm a downright coward, first class. I know what'll happen. I'll shoot this thing, my glasses will break, I won't be able to see. It's a whole thing. Look, Barry, I don't like shooting and maybe killing any more than you do," began Josh. "But look around, we may not have a choice. Back when the campaigner caught you and Ali, I felt like, well, look, just carry it. You probably won't need it, but it'll make me feel better." "Turok," said Kari, breaking up Josh's talk with Barry. Barry hefted the weapon in his hand, and shuddered at its violent weight. "Is it still here?" asked Josh. "The Segna did not build our village around the energy totem, though we did use the cleansed water from the river. We feared something like this might happen. The only people who know where the totem is kept are myself and the village lawgiver, and she is now dead. I fear the hunters may already be on their way there." "How close is the totem?" asked Ardorn. "Not far, less than a mile," said Kari, sprinting out of the gate. "Come, you must take it for safekeeping." "You want me to do what?" asked Allison, absolutely outraged. "Dive into the waters and retrieve the energy totem," the hunter said, pointing at the dead fish and the brine-covered stretch of river before them. The River of Souls was dammed at this point, making the already stagnant water even more rank and foul. "Why would I want to help you creeps?" she said, backing away from the edge of the water, fighting the gag reflex to keep from throwing up. Her backward motion was halted by the hunter drone standing behind her. "Retrieve it and we'll let you live," said the thuggish lead hunter. "Please," said Allison. "Do I really look that stupid? You were talking about eating me back at the camp. That old line may work on your local fleshlings, but I'm from Oklahoma. We know what's what." "I said that before I knew where the totem was," snapped the lead hunter angrily. "Stop arguing, fleshling, dive or we'll gut you here and now." "Then who's going to get your energy totem?" said Allison defiantly. "Aches," the hunter hissed furiously. "You are most definitely not like the other fleshlings we have encountered. Why are you so bold when you know we can rip your throat out any second?" "Hey, I grew up in 1990s America," said Allison proudly. "You are like, totally, the least scary thing I've seen this week." "I don't know what this 1990s America is, child, but it matters not," shouted the hunter. "Get in the water or die. The choice is yours." Allison could see that stalling wasn't going to help any longer. If I don't swallow any of the water, I'll be okay, she thought as she stepped into the lagoon. The smell of rotting fish was too strong. Once she was in up to her knees, she retched through her mouth and nose. The hunters laughed. Ha ha, Liz boys, I'm glad you find this so hilarious, she mumbled, wiping the mess from her mouth. What are you, like, third graders? Silence, the leader shouted, at both her and at his men. Dive. Primogen awaits. Without another word, Allison sank beneath the surface of the water. Josh, Barry, Ardorn, and Kari's men arrived at the lagoon to find the hunters gathered around the edge of the water, leaning forward looking in. Holding a finger to his lips, Kari motioned for his men to circle around to the left while Barry, Josh, Ardorn, and he would come in from the right. They started moving forward, when the lead hunter's ears perked up, having heard the sound of their motion. Human intruders, he called out. The element of surprise was lost. Josh and the others rushed into battle. The hunters were larger than the humans, but they had less sophisticated weapons. Even with such primitive implements, such as Kari's battle staff, the humans were able to dispatch them with ease. Two hunters attacked Josh, who found that a shotgun blast to the kneecaps of a hunter had the same effect as a blast to the kneecaps of just about any other creature. Kneeling over the fallen hunter, Josh asked where his sister was. She serves Primogen by retrieving the totems, said the hunter, as Josh leaned heavily on the creature's shattered leg. Racing over to the lagoon, Josh saw that Allison was bobbing face down in the murky, sewage-like water. Racing to the edge of the river, Josh was about to step in the water when Kari grabbed him by the arm. No, Turok. No one can enter the waters of the River of Souls and live. But my sister is out there, Josh said, straining against the warrior. Then it is too late for her, replied Kari sadly. I am truly sorry. I've got to save her, shouted Josh, pulling free. Suddenly Allison's head moved, then her hand emerged from the water. In her arms, she managed to clutch the energy totem. Josh, she sputtered, coughing up water. Ali, he cried, reaching out to her. Allison's eyes rolled back in her head, and she slipped forward, falling back down into the water. No! Josh shouted. There must be something in here that can help, he said, reaching into the light burden. He came out empty-handed. Karma, he thought. Calm down and focus. Reaching in again, Josh withdrew a necklace, the ends of which seemed to be connected to a sphere containing air. The breath of life, said Ardorn, genuinely shocked. What is it? Josh asked. It is one of the 5 most sacred talismans of the Sarquin tribe, answered Ardorn. With it, you can restore the breath of life to the dead and, legend states, cross the River of Souls. Legend, replied Josh. So no one has actually seen it work? Ardorn shook her head. Doesn't matter, said Josh. I have to try. Placing the necklace around his neck, Josh took a deep breath and stepped into the foul and deadly River of Souls. Wading forward, Josh let out a breath. The necklace seemed to come to life, the charms and baubles braided into the rope began twirling and spinning. A gust of wind moved through the trees and across the water, creating a solid path between Josh and his sister. In its wake, the water turned a clear blue. Walking along the path that was indicated by the breeze, Josh rushed out to his sister and pulled her up. Josh turned her over and patted her face. "Ali, come on, wake up. We're here. I'm here." He got no reaction. He leaned in and listened to her chest. No heartbeat. "Is she?" asked Barry as Josh came back, placing Allison's limp body on the shore. "Turok, your sister may yet have the spark of life within her," said Ardorn. "Use the breath of life." "Breath of life," Josh repeated, panic racing through his entire being. "She can't be dead," he thought. "I can't be responsible for her death, when I talk so big about not killing others." Pinching her nose, Josh leaned in and started performing CPR. He inhaled the breath of life, then puffed the purifying air into his sister's mouth. With each breath, a new breeze moved on the river of souls, clearing the pollutants and purifying the water. Kaf. HRRKRH. Half. Allison coughed after a moment, spitting up thick, oily water. "You came after me." "Well, I thought you'd make a pretty good appetizer for the hunters, but I was worried they might choke on your tongue stud," joked Josh, tears of relief forming in the corners of his eyes. He hugged Allison tightly. There was a special bond between the two siblings, who grew up without a mother or father. Being raised by an older sister had only brought all the siblings closer. Besides, what kind of big brother would I be if I came home and told Vivian and the rest of the family that I lost you in a cursed river? Josh joked again. Allison threw her arms around him and held him just as tight. Meanwhile, Ardorn completely ignored the scene while she inspected the energy totem. "It appears to still be functioning," she reported to no one in particular. "The waters in this part of the river should still be purified by the totem's energy. Apparently there is something new fouling the waters." As Allison hugged her brother, the hunter with the shattered leg saw that she still had the totem by her side. Dragging himself toward her, he almost got within reaching distance before Barry stepped in front of him. Looking up, the hunter saw that he was staring into the mouth of a very large plasma cannon. "And where do you think you are going?" Barry asked. "Lizard Day in the Lost Land is Thursday." "Today is, well, it's not Thursday, okay, so back off." Josh walked back over to the fallen hunter. He grabbed him by the shoulders, leaned in close, and did his best Clint Eastwood impression. "This is my friend's first day with that cannon, so if I were you, I'd be careful that you don't upset him, or he might accidentally blow your head off." While Allison and Barry whistled and clapped at the poor imitation, Josh's basic message was not lost on the hunter. "So tell me, are you hunters getting your orders directly from Primogen, or is there someone else working with you to get the totems?" "Primogen," stuttered the hunter. Who is Primogen? Now, see, Josh began, twisting the hunter's body so that his head sat directly in the sights of Barry's cannon. That's the kind of stuff that gets lying dinosaurs' heads blown off. I know you want to help me, and I also know from speaking with Kari that hunters don't generally work alone. So I'll ask again, who are you working with? The hunter's eyes darted to the mouth of Barry's cannon. The Perlin. We work with the Perlin. See, now was that so hard, said Josh, dropping the hunter on his face, making sure that a good amount of the creature's weight landed on its bad knee. A few moments later, the Segna warriors dragged the hunters away from the lake, as Josh spoke with Ardorn. You have already met the Perlin in your travels, and in the campaigners' arena, said Ardorn. You know that they are a dangerous warrior caste that kill for sport and pleasure. What in the Lost Land doesn't? Asked Josh. You may not know that their breeding grounds are in the heart of the Death Marshes, at the mouth of the River of Souls, explained Ardorn. I suspect that the pestilence that continues to foul the river despite the presence of the totems stems from that place. The Eurasian mountains lie just beyond them. The Council of Voices has heard reports that Primogen has discovered another energy totem deep in the marshes that had been hidden by a mystical cloak, and has persuaded the Perlin to retrieve it for him in return for a grant of power over the Lost Land once he leaves. Don't they know that if he powers up that ship of his, the Lost Land will be ripped apart? Asked Josh. Apparently they believe that to be a lie fabricated by their enemies, replied Ardorn. The engines of Ardorn's hovercraft hummed in the air as Barry, Allison, and Kari piloted the craft to the edge of the clearing. Well, the hovercraft is none the worse for wear, Barry said as Josh and Ardorn loaded the energy totem onto the ship. I was able to reconnect the wiring that popped loose when we were knocked out over the riverbank. Where to, now? Back to the Council of Voices. No, said Josh, there are still 3 totems out there that the Primogen has not yet gotten. And the few survivors of the Sheena village have been taken by the Perlin downstream. Kari has to stay here to see to the burials of the dead. We have to press on down the river to the Death Marshes. Death Marshes, or River of, isn't anything around here called the Enchanted Forest, or the Delightful Meadow, or something like that, said Barry. If there were, said Josh, we Turoks would be out of business. Then the hovercraft glided off toward the Death Marshes. Chapter 6. The hovercraft followed the River of Souls upstream. The ship traveled close to the water, floating only inches from its surface to avoid being seen over the tall reeds on each bank. Josh stared out into the reeds, his mind racing. He didn't want to admit it to the others, but he was really starting to get worried. Up until a week ago, all the word Turok meant to him was the name of a fictional character from Sarquin legend. Now, not only was it real, it was him, and here was the name, as some kind of sick graffiti, scrawled in blood on the wall of a village filled with dead people. People that died because of him, because some demented creature called Primogen wanted the Turok dead. A cool breeze blew off the fog-draped waters, and Josh shuddered. I'm going to have a talk with the rest of the family after this is all over, he thought, and see how the other Turoks dealt with being the cause of all this death. While Josh was lost in thought, trying to clear his head by searching the shoreline along the marshes for any sign of life, Ardorn noticed that Allison had not spoken to her brothers since he had saved her at the hunter's camp. "Why do you avoid your brother, Allison?" she finally asked. "What do I say to him?" she answered after a moment. "He brought me back from the dead. Don't you find that a little odd? He is Turok. Life and death are his to influence, for himself, for all of us," replied Ardorn. "He walked on water, for crying out loud," stated Allison. "That might be easy for you to accept, Ardorn, but a half hour ago I was dead. Totally rigged white light, angels, waiting lines to pass through pearly gates. The everlasting shopping mall in the sky. Then my brother comes along and with a magic necklace brings me back to life. Legends have always said that being Turok was an important thing for the boys in our family, but this..." Ardorn nodded. "I understand your meaning, Allison. While I am the speaker of Forever Light, the passing of the mantle from my mother to me was a choice that I knew would change my entire life. I waited more than 500 years to begin this phase of my life, and in that time I watched my mother, and the Turoks of times past, and times yet to be, defend the lost land against many threats. I wondered if I could ever be worthy of being speaker, if I could ever serve the Turok of my time, as my mother had served the others. It must have made you feel small, right?" "Unimportant," Allison said, rising and crossing to stand next to Ardorn at the hovercraft's controls. "For a time," replied the speaker. "Then I realized that just because I could never be my mother, that didn't mean I could not contribute to the protection of the lost land. You need not look on your brother as better or greater than you. He is just different. You will bring honor to the Firesid name yet. In your own time. In your own way." "Thanks," Allison said, craning her neck to follow the sound of a cricket as it rose and faded in the night. "Thanks for listening. For a 500-year-old hologram, you're okay by me." "You, too, are okay by me," Allison Firesid Ardorn said, smiling. The two women laughed. A massive splash in the river shook the hovercraft. Something jumped right into the water, causing all on deck to run over to see what was now in the water with them. "I am getting really tired of running into these tales from the crypt rejects," said Barry, lowering his plasma cannon to his side. Whatever was in the water had gone. "Are you sure we can trust what that hunter told us, Josh? He knows what will happen to him if Turok becomes displeased," Josh said with more than a hint of sarcasm in his voice. He placed the tech bow that he had instinctively pulled from the light burden back into the satchel. "Based on what the hunter told us, the Perlin camp should be right around this bend." As they rounded the curve in the river, Josh and his friends were hit by the overpowering stench of rotting, decaying flesh. Dotting the edge of the marsh were a series of huts and structures made of heavy stone. While none were elegantly put together, it was clear that beneath the apparent haphazard construction was a civilized mind at work. Several multi-level structures reached into the murky fog-shrouded sky, and a series of bridges linked the upper levels, enabling the Perlin to move about from structure to structure without ever setting foot on the ground. This was a good thing, as Josh and the others had to use all their willpower to keep from getting sick over the rank odor rising from the stagnant pools of slimy water. "Hey, if you feel the urge," said Allison, leaning over the railing, "just spew. You'll feel better, trust me." "No, thanks," said Barry, quickly covering his nose. "We should pull ashore here," said Ardorn, pointing to the riverbank. "Suits me fine," said Barry, through his fingers, which were clamped firmly over his mouth. Ardorn brought the hovercraft to a halt on the marshy bank. They jumped out of it and were immediately greeted by a squad of 20 Perlin war clubs. The Perlin were known for not being the most leadership-oriented warriors, so as Josh sized up his opponents, he felt fairly comfortable they would not charge until their leader, the Perlin headsman, made himself known and gave the word. Turok's eyes darted around the village as he slowly withdrew 2 massive battle knives from the light burden. Through the windows of the buildings he could see the inhabitants of this village, prisoners from the Segna tribe, and an older human man, all being held captive by Perlin war clubs. Out of the crowd stepped a Perlin, with a crest of red fur running across the top of its head, and down to the middle of its back. The Perlin clutched a human girl, no older than 9 or 10, in its left hand. "Only a coward hides behind a little girl," said Josh. The headsman laughed. "Who's hiding, Turok?" "I would only hide if there was a threat, and I see none." "Maybe you should look a little closer," Josh said. The little girl dropped to the ground, and sat unmoving in the mud, stunned that she was free but confused that it was still hard to breathe. Reaching up, she felt the headsman's hand still clutched around her throat, though there was no arm connected to the wrist. "Ayag!" cried the headsman as he dropped to his knees, blood gushing from the severed stump at the end of his arm. Josh had sprung into a battle crouch, his twin blades glistening with Perlin blood. Faster than the eye could follow, he had swung both up and down across the headsman's arm, chopping through his bone and gristle with furious speed. Through barely clenched teeth, the headsman was able to utter one intelligible word: attack. The war clubs swarmed forward. Josh pulled a machine gun from the light burden and began firing. When he didn't have time to reload, he just threw the gun overhand into the faces of the onrushing creatures. The empty gun didn't hurt the beasts, but distracted them long enough for Josh to ram a blade deep into their chests. One of the war clubs launched himself from the top of a hut, and was about to land on Josh's back when a loud choom blast split the air. Whirling around, Josh saw that Barry had joined the fray, firing the plasma cannon. Josh also saw Allison herd the little girl and some of her friends away from the center of the battle. Now he was free to fight the battle at hand. Seeing their opportunity to escape during the confusion of battle, the Segna prisoners and the old man slipped from the hut where they had been held captive. This departure did not go unseen by the Perlin headsman, who followed the escaped prisoners, still trailing blood from the end of his left wrist. Allison saw this out of the corner of her eye. Running over, she slammed herself hard into the headsman's back, shoving him to the ground. Allison feared whatever the headsman would do when he got up, but she was shocked to see that instead of getting up, he went down deeper. "What's going on?" the Perlin asked, thrashing about. With each movement, the headsman sank deeper. "A quicksand patch," said the old man who, along with the other escapees, had managed to remain on the side of the churning pit. "This area is filled with it." Allison watched as the quicksand pulled the headsman under. "You can't let me just sink into this," the headsman cried, his fur getting matted with a clumpy oatmeal-like goo. "You think my people are monsters, but if you let me die down here, then who's the monster? Save me and you have my word that I will not harm you." Allison looked at the creature, who not a minute ago would have killed her and everyone in the village, as he pleaded for his life. She thought about leaving him in the quicksand to die, but realized that he was right. If she did, she would be no better than him. Breaking off a long root, Allison extended it out to the headsman. Grasping it with his one good arm, the creature held on as Allison dragged him back to solid land. Coughing up bits of dirt and muck, the creature stood. "You are a fool," he said. "I would not have done the same for you. I guess that makes one of us a decent human being, and the other," Allison paused, "well, whatever you are." "Compassion for one's enemies," said the old man. "That is the sign of a true hero. Perhaps I have judged the Fayazid family too harshly." "Who are you?" Allison asked, turning to face the elder. "And how do you know my name?" In the split second that she averted her eyes, the Perlin headsman lunged for her. "Allison, down!" Josh shouted from across the clearing, as he fired an energy-charged tech arrow at the headsman. Hearing her brother and reacting instinctively, Allison dropped to the ground. The arrow plunged into the headsman's chest, blue electric flame licking around his body. As he fell, Allison again expected to see the deceitful creature bound back to his feet and come charging at her. He did not. Instead, he vanished, falling into a fold gate opening. "Treachery," said the elder, as the fold gate snapped shut. "That's exactly what I expected from a Perlin headsman." Josh and Allison were shocked. The Turok lowered his tech bow and stared at the elder before him. With their leader apparently having been swallowed into thin air, the superstitious war clubs stopped fighting. The Segna prisoners were free. "Did you do that?" Josh asked the elder. "I thought I was the only one who could open fold gates." "Come, Turok, we must talk," said the elder, placing his hand on Josh's shoulder. Josh and the others followed the old man to the hovercraft. "I am Seek," began the old man, once he, Josh, Allison, Barry, and Ardorn were settled on board the hovercraft. "I am the elder in a nearby village. I was captured by the Perlin because I have something Primogen wants as badly as he wants the totems. That's why we came to the Death Marshes," said Josh. "To find the hidden totem?" "I assumed that is what would bring the Turok here," explained Seek. "I do not know of its location." What could Primogen want as much as the totems? Asked Ardorn, surprised that there were others who knew more about the evil creature than she or the council. This, said Seek, grasping the sides of his wooden leg. Giving it a twist to the left, the leg unscrewed along a thread near his knee. Josh gaped in wonder as the elder upended the hollow leg, spilling out a glistening opaque black gemstone roughly the size of his fist. The one place the purlin didn't look, said the elder, holding the gemstone in the center of their circle. The crystalline facets refracted the light, mixing visions of places and times from across reality with the shadows on the walls. Fold gates can be opened with only 2 keys, explained Seek. The folding eye, said Josh. The elder nodded. And this gemstone? They are hewn from the same crystal. Your folding eye allows you to see the gates and enter them at will. The crystal can do the same, but it also allows the wielder to clearly see and control the many places a gate can open out onto. So where did you send the headsman? Asked Barry. I'm assuming it's not the luxury suite at the Gailana Hilton. Let's just say you won't be seeing him again anytime soon, said Seek, with a sly smile. He then grew serious and returned to the subject at hand. The secret of the fold gate openings is almost more important to Primogen than gathering the totems, continued the elder. Using only this gemstone as a compass, Primogen believes he can accurately guide his light ship back home. He may need to capture the energy totems in order to power his ship, but he would have no way to control it, steer it, if you will, back to his own universe without this. Why have you kept this information from the council? Asked Ardorn. Because over the years I have seen the council make mistakes, some that at times rival Primogen's evil, said the elder. His words hit Ardorn like a slap in the face. They have locked themselves away for so long, they no longer listen to the voices of the people, and their followers tend to suffer from a lack of ability to act and think for themselves. Then, turning to Josh, he added, I have never been a fan of Turoks, either. The blind aggression of some of the Turoks I have seen is most distasteful. But this girl, he reached out to Allison, who showed compassion, when a colder heart would have let that monster die in the quicksand, showed me that perhaps there is more to the Firezid line than I was willing to grant. You mean I did something right? Allison couldn't help but ask in surprise. Of course you did, Ali, said Josh. Why are you so surprised? No reason, Allison answered shyly, sneaking a look at Ardorn. The elder handed Josh the gemstone. Your family has my respect and trust, young Turok. Use the gemstone wisely, but bear in mind that the ages have drained its energies, and the viewing of the many exits from within the netherscape on the other side of the fold gates may be hazardous. The netherscape? Josh asked. The netherscape is the area between the fold gate openings, explained Seek. It connects all points, all places and times. Josh nodded as the hovercraft headed for Seek's village. After returning the elder safely to his home, Josh gathered everyone on board before him. I've been thinking, Josh began. And I've come to a decision. If this gemstone can give us control over the exit points of the fold gates, then there is just one place that I want to go. Back to Earth. Chapter 7. Are you nuts? Allison had said that 6 times to Josh, and each time he had not answered. Finally, sitting back against the side of the hovercraft, he looked up at her and spoke. No, Ali, I'm doing the first sensible thing I've done since this whole nightmare began. Everything I do seems to have worked out all right in the end so far, but there's just so long our luck is going to hold out. No, if we stay here, sooner or later I'm going to make a mistake that will get one of us killed. If we go back to Earth, maybe we can get some help from the rest of the Sarquin nation, or call in the US Army or something to help us storm Primogen's ship. And you're not serious, are you, Josh? Asked Barry. Go to the Army? What are you going to tell them? Excuse me, Mr. General, sir. There's a race of evolved dinosaurs in another dimension planning an attack on Earth. They have been trying to kill me and my family for more than 4,000 years, so could you lend me a few tanks so I can stop a mad time traveler from returning to his universe and ripping everything apart? I want to be in the room with a video camera when you make that speech. Enough, Barry said. Turok, jumping to his feet and getting in his friend's face. I don't know what to do. This is all too much for me. The responsibility of protecting Earth and all places throughout reality is that of the Turok, and the Turok alone, said Ardorn, bringing the craft to a stationary hover in midair. If you leave now, Primogen will win, and the efforts of generations to preserve peace and life will end for nothing. You and all that you know and love will die. My mind is made up, Ardorn snapped Josh. Give me one good reason why I should listen to them, to you, now. If my words cannot persuade you of the urgency of your mission, perhaps another can show you, Ardorn said. Josh stared at her, wondering what she meant. Are you sure this is going to hold? Barry asked. Ardorn cinched the energy rope tightly around Barry's waist. The blue translucent tether was connected to an energy anchor embedded in the ground. The energy rope extended from the anchor and circled the waists of each of the 4 travelers. This line will extend infinitely while remaining anchored here, explained Ardorn. As long as I am alive, this line should hold, no matter what energies we may encounter in the Netherscape. If anything goes wrong, we can pull ourselves back to this point with this tether. Then let's go, Josh said, flipping the folding eye down over his face. A fold gate opening immediately snapped into view next to them. Josh eased the hovercraft forward. As the bow entered the fold gate opening, the vessel was sucked into the Netherscape, the realm between fold gate openings, with incredible force. Up, down, front, back, left, and right meant nothing inside the Netherscape. Reality bent and curved in all directions. Josh had gotten used to some disorientation from his last few visits, but this time was different. The gemstone of the Elder hung on a thin leather rope around his neck. The opaque stone began to glow, and the swirling murk of the Netherscape slowed and cleared. Josh was amazed at how much easier it was to navigate through the Netherscape using the gemstone. All around them, fold gates floated. Through the openings they could clearly see life in other times, other places. Some gates showed the past of Galeana, others the past on Earth, and still others showed unknown times and places on alien worlds. Some openings revealed the present time both in the Lost Land and on Earth, but in various different locations. Other gates opened into the future, here and everywhere. There Ardorn said, pointing off in the distance. Watch and see. Josh looked through the gate Ardorn had indicated and saw a group of humans running for their lives through a moonlit night, looking over their shoulders in terror as they made their way through bushes and branches. Suddenly, out of the trees above, a group of flesh-eater sentinels leaped on the humans. Each sentinel stood 10 feet tall and was covered from head to toe in armor. They carried swords as long as their arms, as well as guns and batons that hung around their waists on hooks. As they attacked the humans, they used none of these weapons, as they were simply satisfied to rip the terrified men, women, and children to pieces with their bare hands. The flesh-eaters, stated Ardorn. In the early time, just after the creation of Galeana, the Lost Land was overrun with this murderous race. No reason could tame their insanity. Their hunger for murder was fed by a lust to advance in their ranks by partaking of the blood of the mother, a cancerous monstrosity that lived in their mountain stronghold. Once infused with her essence, these creatures became even more terrifying and powerful. Shifting his view to another gate, Josh saw through the opening a different view of Galeana in which some time had passed, and a new breed of flesh-eater, the Death Guards, had risen, made strong by the blood of this mother creature. Their fangs glistened with blood, and chunks of human flesh hung from their jaws. The humans in the village visible through this gate cowered in fear as the Death Guards advanced, their night shattered by a massive explosion and what seemed to be gunfire. The Death Guards and all the flesh-eaters would have hunted all of the races in the Lost Land to extinction, explained Ardorn. If not for the efforts of one man. The view through the gate shifted as a tall Sarquin warrior carrying the light burdens stepped into view. Toting a massive automatic rifle in one hand, and a plasma cannon in the other, this Turok of the past let out a fearsome war cry. Behind him stood an entire army of warriors, an hourglass infinity emblem like that on the light burden painted on their chests. Each echoed his war cry of freedom. Talset was his name, continued Ardorn. He changed the course of history here, earning the name the Valiant One, and earning a place as one of the bravest Turoks ever to live. He ensured that life would continue not only here, but in your world as well. The battle against Primogen is not only the concern of the Lost Land, Turok. When Primogen's light ship ripped a piece of Earth free and deposited it here, as it did with so many other worlds, it did more than link our two homes in a physical sense. Your great ancestor Palsegna Sarquin, for whom your tribe is named, and who was the first human to walk the hills of Galeana, did more than find a gateway to a lost world. The souls of Turoks and the Lost Land are tied together forever. It is a tie you can sever, if that is truly your desire, but you would render the efforts of so many meaningless if you turned your back on your responsibility. Looking away from the gate that showed Talset battling the flesh-eaters, Josh scanned gates all around him. For as far as he could see, Turoks of all ages battled the forces of evil and darkness. He watched as some died, and as others fought on with wounds that would have brought lesser men to their knees. "Hey," said Allison excitedly, pointing at another gate. "Check out Uncle Carl." Josh watched as his Uncle Carl was attacked by fireborns, and winced as he saw him covered in their volcanic blood, suffering the wounds that would ultimately take his life. Josh's chest filled with pride as he saw Carl continue to fight the dinosaurs even though he surely must have felt himself dying. Josh thought back to the day, merely a week ago in linear Earth time, when he had knelt by Carl's deathbed and seen the injuries inflicted by the fireborn, as well as the unflinching bravery of his uncle. Carl Firezid was called the secondary because it was not really his responsibility to become Turok, Ardorn explained to Josh. Carl's brother, John, your father, failed at that task, and had been missing for many years, when Carl became Turok to ensure that Earth and Gaelana were protected, and to uphold the honor of his family. The fold gates swirled past swiftly as Josh turned his concentration on the focusing gemstone. He saw through the moving, swaying windows into the past. There, the Turoks of all times each carried the light burden, which had been received from the generation before, slung around their shoulders. A new gate flickered into view before Josh. Looking through, he could see his home, his sister Vivian's house in Oklahoma. In the living room, Vivian sat with Martin Sunhub, an elder of the Sarquin tribe. Listening to their conversation, Josh realized that only seconds had passed on Earth since he, Barry, and Allison had disappeared from his room and entered the Lost Land. All Josh had to do to go home and end all this nightmare was step through the fold gate. "Well, Turok, have you finally made your decision?" asked Ardorn. "I had no idea of the importance of being a Turok," he said, looking at his light burden, feeling its weight on his shoulders for perhaps the first time. "Seeing my uncle, my ancestors, I understand, I think." "Well, I understand enough to know that I've got to stay." "Stay and stop Primogen?" "We stay," said Allison. "Though I could sure use a bowl of Viv's vegetable soup right about now." Josh knew better than to disagree with her. "Me, too," Barry echoed. "I mean the part about staying, not the part about the soup. Not that there's anything wrong with your sister's soup, mind you. I just..." "Thanks, Bud," Josh replied, smiling. Then he thought silently, "I just wonder if they know what they are getting themselves into. Then again, what am I getting myself into? So what's next?" Allison said as the gemstone around Josh's neck began to pulse and flicker. Josh's control over the gates was faltering as their extended time in the Netherscape had drained the gemstone further. "I say we go after the next totem," said Josh. "Where would that be, Ardorn?" "The council told me that most of the remaining totems have been captured by Primogen's forces. All but 2. and they are both held there. Ardorn pointed at a fold gate opening that showed the stronghold of the flesh-eaters. Perfect, said Josh. Let's pay the mother of the flesh-eaters a little visit. I think Talset would approve, don't you? The others nodded in agreement. Using the folding eye and the focusing gemstone, Josh and his friends were able to step through fold gate openings into the Flesh-Eater's mountain citadel, place explosive charges, then step back outside without being noticed. Explosions rocked the mountain, as timed concussion bombs exploded on cue all around the Flesh-Eater's main breeding pens. The startled creatures never knew what hit them. Their death screams echoed through the rubble. The passageway to the chamber of the mother was not so easy to get into. It was guarded on all sides by death guards armed with plasma energy rifles, and by even more massive members of the elite Lords of the Flesh, ghoulish half-reptilian, half-human beasts capable of casting magical spells and vanishing into thin air at will. Josh found himself with his back pressed to a wall just outside the guards' line of fire. Any ideas on what we do next? Barry asked as he joined Josh behind the wall outside the mother's chamber. I don't know how much longer this cannon you gave me is going to last. The blasts seem to be getting weaker and weaker. Taking the focusing gemstone into his hand, Josh concentrated deeply. A fold gate pathway appeared to him, then flickered out before he could step through it. 2 more attempts resulted in the same thing. The gemstone is almost totally drained, Josh said as Ardorn and Allison joined them. I think if I really force it I can get it to stay open long enough to get you guys through, back to the hovercraft. What about you? Allison asked. I have to stay on this side and keep the gate open. Don't worry. I'll be fine. Here he said, reaching into the light burden and withdrawing a gunny sack. Looking inside, Allison saw dozens of thick, smoked glass balls, each the size of a grapefruit, all filled with an amber liquid. What are these? She asked, jostling the sack. Careful, he said. They are filled with nitroglycerin and some other pretty potent explosives. All around them bolts of rapid-fire plasma blasts from the death guards thundered on the wall, sending gravel showering down on them. Josh grabbed the sack and held it steady, blocking falling debris from hitting it with his back. My, someone's getting better with his bag of tricks, Allison said, taking the sack back, this time holding it more carefully. Now, listen up, Josh continued. Go through the gate. If I don't come through in 20 minutes, drop these down the top of the mountain. Then get out of here as fast as you can and back into the hovercraft. Got it? But what about you? Said Allison, the concern showing in her voice. You'll be killed by the explosion, too. If I can't get back through the gate with the energy totems in that time, I don't think it will matter, replied Josh. The gemstone will be drained, and I'll be stuck here with these beauties, anyway. Understood, Turok said Ardorn. Allison paused for a moment, as if she was about to speak again. Instead, she threw her arms around her brother's neck. See you in 20 minutes, she said. And don't be late. The gemstone glimmered, and a fold gate twisted open against the wall. The deck of the hovercraft was visible on the other side. Jumping through, Barry and Allison looked back to see Josh giving them a thumbs-up sign. They wondered if they would see him again. Then the gemstone went dark, its power and a chance to get back to Earth completely gone. Chapter 8 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. Josh counted to himself, wishing he could find a watch in the light burden. Instead, withdrawing his hand, he found a rocket launcher. Not a Rolex, but it'll do, he chuckled to himself. Stepping from behind the wall with the launcher on his shoulder, Josh tried to keep track of the minutes while addressing the death guard on the other side of the gorge. Okay, fellas, that's enough. Back up and let me by, or there's gonna be some fireworks. Foolish Turok, the lead death guard said. To die for the mother is to know the embrace of heaven. Sheesh, everybody in the lost land is sure in a big hurry to die, Josh thought as he aimed the launcher at the ground near the guard's feet. Happy to oblige, he said, firing. The Stinger missile shot across the chasm. A massive explosion shook the mountain, as the missile obliterated half the outcropping the warriors had been standing on. As they fell, Josh watched. The guards were broken and blooded, but he was happy to see none of them had died. You show us mercy, young one, boomed a voice from behind him. Whirling, Josh found himself face to face with a lord of the flesh. How did he get on top of me so quietly? Talset would not have ever made that mistake, the flesh lord roared. I'm not Talset, Josh said, yanking a Sarquin talon blade out of the light burden and thrusting it at the flesh lord at the same time, but I'm still a Turok. The stripling has fangs, the flesh lord said, a faint smile spreading across his face. Whirling and dropping to a crouch, the flesh lord attempted to sweep Josh's feet out from under him. Ardorn, straining with the staffs, snapped into his mind, as Josh leaped into the air, flipping over the flesh lord's head, and landing behind him. And I bite, Josh said, trying to keep his head. The flesh lord hissed, standing and withdrawing a long dagger from beneath his tunic. Skittering along the edge of the thin stone ledge, the creature raced at Josh, hacking and slashing at his midsection, causing sparks to fly off the Turok's breastplate. Sweeping his hand in a wide arcing figure eight with a double-edged talon blade, Josh blocked blow after blow. As he reached the end of the ledge, Josh realized he had allowed himself to be backed into a corner. That didn't worry him too much, as he was fairly certain he could still leap over the flesh lord's head. But why does this guy have that constant grin on his face? Josh couldn't help thinking. Why is he so calm? What's he distracting me from? You're not going to defeat me, if that's your best, Turok said with great bravado. So just get out of the way, and let me in to see the mother, and maybe I won't slit your throat. I doubt you would slit my throat, the flesh lord said, a mocking tone to his voice. Besides, keeping you from the mother is the last thing I would do. Josh felt a tingle run up his spine, and he realized too late what was going on. As they fought, the flesh lord had been using hand motions to cast a spell of displacement on him. racked with a gut-turning sensation, totally unlike what he felt when passing through a fold gate. Josh felt the world drop away, then come crashing down on his head. 1 second Josh was all the way inside the cavern fighting with the Lord of the Flesh. The next second he was inside what could only be the exact-covered walls of the Mother's chamber. "Welcome, Joshua Firesid," said a voice that sounded almost like a record playing backward. Josh tried to move and found that he was sealed inside a cocoon of hardened rock. Out of the corner of his eye the Mother appeared. Covered with running sores and dripping with a sticky luminous slime, the beast tilted its head toward Josh, its eyes rolling around in its sockets to look in his direction. "Set me free," Josh said flatly. "Now why would I do that, Sarquin?" said the Mother in her bizarre voice. "You break into my home, kill my children, and threaten my life, and expect that I will set you free at your command? You do not frighten me, pretender. My kind has killed many of your kind over the millennia. Your life is mine to end. You're the one who's going to die," Mother Josh said, struggling against the bindings. "Primogen is going to destroy this place, and everything else in the Lost Land if you don't set me free." "I suppose you have come for these," the creature stated, gesturing with its cracked, cancerous hands toward the 2 remaining energy totems. The totems pulsated with power on either side of the hideous beast. "I must disappoint you, human. I plan to give these to Primogen, as a symbol of my commitment to him. In return, he has promised that my children and I will return to his universe with him and serve as his personal army, protectors of his rule in that segment of time and space." "You're a fool if you believe he'll play straight with you," said Josh. "Oh, I am quite aware he plans to betray me the moment he returns to his home. But he cannot leave without me, as long as I have the energy totems to block his departure. Once we're away from Galiana, I will deal with him. I can defeat him in his home, and then my children will have a whole new universe to conquer." "His universe?" Mother let out a sound that was somewhere between coughing and laughing. Josh was about to respond when a massive explosion shook the whole mountain, sending stalactites plummeting from the high-vaulted ceiling. 20 Mississippi, he thought as his own rocky cocoon split into a million pieces. "Shouldn't we wait a little longer?" Allison said, as Ardorn steered the hovercraft over the mouth of the mountaintop. In truth, the mountain was a dormant volcano, its heat providing a warm incubator for the growth of the creatures the Mother spawned below. "If Primogen gets those remaining totems, he may be able to channel enough power to start his lightship," said Ardorn, knowing her next words would not be well received. "It has been 20 minutes. The Council will ensure that a new Turok will be trained." "Just like that," shouted Allison. "A new Turok? Like a new shirt?" "That's my brother you're talking about, Ardorn. He's saved all our lives a dozen times over since we've been here. He deserves a few minutes." "No," Allison Barry said. "What did you say?" Allison snapped. "Josh is my friend, too," Ali Barry said softly. For the first time in his life there was no trace of humor in his voice. but you saw the same things we did in the Netherscape. This is bigger than us, bigger than Josh. We have to make sure that everything doesn't just disappear. Josh understood this when he pushed us through the gate. Allison looked at Barry, not believing her ears. So we just let him die? No, we make sure everyone else keeps on living, he answered. Allison sat in stony silence. Guiding the hovercraft as high as they could go, Ardorn tilted the vessel so Allison could release the glass bombs. As they fell toward the mouth of the mountain, Ardorn jammed the controls of the craft hard to the left, steering the ship quickly out of range. The explosions that echoed throughout the mountain triggered a lava flow through the fissures in the mother's birth chamber. The egg sacs webbed to the walls burst into flames. A high-pitched whine filled the air as the developing creatures screamed in agony. Josh clambered up the side of the outcropping, barely keeping ahead of the rushing lava flow. His main concern at the moment was trying to stay ahead of the mother, who was wading through the lava after him. "This is your doing, Flesh. You have killed us all," she screamed. "Consider it a present from Talset," Mother shouted Josh. A horrid sound of bubbling, crackling, insect-like skin, mixing with wails of pain, filled the cavern as the lava consumed the mother, drawing her and the two energy totems beneath the surface of its glowing wake. "That's two totems that Primogen won't be getting his hands on," Josh thought with satisfaction as he watched the totems explode, scattering their healing energy throughout the lost land. "And my name's not Flesh, it's Turok." Surrounded on all sides by lava, with nowhere to go, Josh snapped the folding eye down into place. Looking around, he was horrified to find this room had no fold gates. "Slick move, Turok," he thought. The lava continued to rise. Reaching into the light burden, he groped about for something that might help him. His fingers brushed against something hot, and for a moment he thought the lava had burned through the bottom of the satchel. Pulling his hand out, he saw that his skin was covered to his elbow in a yellowish-green glowing liquid. It burned but was cold at the same time. On a hunch, Josh reached out and held his hand above the lava flow. He did not feel the heat. Plunging his hands into the light burden again and again, he scooped out more and more of the green liquid, covering every inch of his body with it, smearing it on the outside of the light burden as well. Totally coated, he stepped out onto the lava, and immediately sank beneath the surface. Half falling, half swimming, Josh found himself alive and hurled beneath the lava, protected by the magical Turok talisman. All around him red glowing chunks of molten earth surged and flowed, carrying him toward the doorway to the chamber, which had been eaten away. Finding firm ground beneath his feet, at the bottom of the chamber, Josh began walking toward the exit. Allison sat, dangling her feet over the edge of the hovercraft, looking at the volcano that raged full force below them. There was no sign of her brother. "You know, I still owe Josh $25 for fronting me the dough to buy Windows 98, said Barry, trying to be comforting. "You know how he is, I'm sure he'll live just to collect." Allison looked at him with tears in his eyes. His comforting wasn't working. Ardorn stood alone near the back of the hovercraft. She felt ashamed as she watched the lava spill over the lip of the volcano. This Turok was braver than I believed he could be, she thought. Suddenly Barry screamed, pointing over the side of the craft. "Look! There he is!" Allison leaped to her feet, and Ardorn ran to the edge of the craft to join them. Looking down, walking out of the waterfall of raging lava and magma, was Josh, glowing an iridescent green. "The heart of fire," Ardorn said, almost to herself. "What?" said Barry. "The heart of fire," she repeated. "It is a sacred Turok talisman. It has provided him with a salve to protect him from the lava. It is quite powerful, and it can only be worn by a true Turok." "That's my brother," Allison squealed, hugging Ardorn and Barry. "Let's go down there and get him." Grabbing the controls, Ardorn steered the craft toward Josh. And, for the first time since this whole adventure had begun, she smiled. "Cannonball!" Josh shouted as he jumped off the top of a cliff, tucked his legs under him and executed 1, 2, 3 spins before exploding into the water, sending a spray high into the air. "No!" shrieked Allison, covering her head. It was too late. The cascade of water drenched everyone sitting by the edge of the small lake. The surprise shower had an odd effect on Ardorn. Her holographic skin rippled, the bioelectric circuits that made up her body began glowing a sulfur blue. "Very funny, Turok." "Hey, come on, relax, everybody," Josh implored. He himself was feeling the most relaxed he had felt since the day his older sister Vivian fetched him home to talk with his dying Uncle Carl, the day this whole Lost Land ordeal began. "We won," Josh continued. "Bottom of the 9th, 2 outs, game on the line, and bam! Firezid blasts a homer to win one for the Turok All-Stars. Instead of a Louisville Slugger it was the Heart of Fire talisman, and instead of some steroid-powered lefty on the mound, it was the mother of the flesh eaters inside a mountain. But the box score will still show that Joshua Firezid, aka Turok, came through when the pressure was on. Right, Ardorn? After all, we have 3 of the energy totems. All Primogen only has 6, and 3 were destroyed or are at least halfway to the center of the Earth by now. As long as half of the totems are safe and protected, old Mr. Homesick Alien can't power up his light ship and end the party for everyone else. Now, come on in and take a swim." "We must stay ever vigilant," said Ardorn, her holographic image reforming. "Primogen is clever. We have not seen the last of him. Besides, I do not swim." "You don't know how to swim," said Josh, wading over to the side of the lagoon. "You never learned how to swim. I am the Speaker of the Council of Voices. The Council does not need me to swim, so I've never learned. You may be the Speaker of the Council, but you're still a teenager. Loosen up and have some fun." "I am not a teenager, Turok. I have lived for over 500 years. "Stop right there," said Josh, ducking out of the way as Allison jackknifed into the water, figuring it was better to get wet on her own terms than to get soaked again by Josh. You are not 500 years old. Parts of your memories are 500 years old. Maybe some of the bioelectric circuits that make up your body have seen a century or two, but you're still Ardorn, a young woman. I know I couldn't have come half this way without your help. I wish you would allow yourself to have some fun. Ardorn blinked, shocked at the audacity of what Josh was saying. She was even more shocked to realize that he was right. She looked to Allison for help. Don't look at me, said Allison. You're on your own. I know how to have fun, Ardorn said, looking at the ground. Yeah, said Josh, slapping the water and sending a splash arcing toward her. Try to prove it. Ardorn looked around the camp and, after a moment, closed her eyes. I'm waiting, teased Josh. Ardorn's expression became more intense. Then, a rippling wake made its way through the water to where Josh and Allison were paddling. A swirling funnel of water moved all around and beneath them. Then, just as fast as it had appeared, it was gone. What was that? Josh asked, his voice trailing off as Allison's laughter filled the air. Looking over to his sister, Josh saw that she was pointing in the air above him, totally unable to control herself. Craning his neck, he saw what she had found so funny. Floating above him, just out of reach, were his pants, surrounded by a glowing energy field that stretched across the lake and connected to Ardorn's furrowed brow. Beneath her furrowed brow, her mouth formed a huge smile. Give me back my pants, Josh shouted, lunging up out of the water, then ducking back down swiftly when he realized that he was naked from the waist down. Now who doesn't know how to have fun, said Ardorn, as Josh reached up, then bobbed back down, grabbing at his pants in vain. While the others were swimming, Barry stayed back in the hovercraft. Josh wanted him to swim and play with them, but Barry said that he was feeling tired and just felt like resting. All this adventure had taken a lot out of him. What he didn't tell Josh was that for the last few hours he had been having massive headaches, and he thought he had been hearing voices in his head. He didn't recognize the voices, and he couldn't make out what they were saying, but they were disturbing nonetheless. Josh has enough to worry about with saving the lost land without having to worry about me, Barry thought to himself, as he walked over to the bow of the craft. The 3 totems were still locked beneath the energy field Ardorn had erected around them. Take them, said the strange voice in his head. Barry shook his head and tried to focus. It felt as if he had blacked out for a moment, and he looked down and saw that he was pressing against the energy field, trying to get through it. What am I doing? He said to himself, pulling his hands back. I must need some sleep. I'm starting to imagine. Take them. Barry grabbed the sides of his head. He was sure of it this time. He clearly heard a voice, and he clearly heard exactly what it was saying. Take them. Bring them to me. Barry stumbled back against the side of the hovercraft, placing his hands in front of his face. Trying to shake off the pain in his head, He pulled his hands away from his eyes, only to see that they were now two massive purple claws. "Take them!" the voice now shouted. "Arg!" Barry screamed as the voice in his head knocked him to the floor of the craft. "Did you hear that?" asked Ardorn, turning in the direction of the hovercraft. With her concentration broken, Josh's pants fell from the sky, landing in the water next to him. "Sounded like Barry," Josh said, pulling on his pants as he ran out of the water. "I knew we shouldn't have left him alone. Come on." Sprinting across the open ground between the lake and the hovercraft, Josh cursed himself for ever bringing Barry and Allison to the Lost Land in the first place. "Being Turok is my responsibility, not theirs. I have no right risking their lives. Like they'd listen to me, anyway." He prayed that his friend was all right. He was not prepared for what was waiting. Coming up short in front of the craft, Josh was shocked to see that the entire left side of Barry's head had turned a bright crimson and had grown a long mane of stringy black hair next to Barry's own neatly trimmed blonde crew cut. "Barry?" Josh asked, stepping forward slowly, watching the physical transformation of his friend wash over Barry's body like a wave. "Don't get any closer to him," Ardorn warned, placing a hand on Josh's chest, restraining him. "That's not Barry anymore." "Well, who in the name of the Lost Land is it?" asked Josh. "It is Primogen," replied Ardorn, all emotion drained from her voice. "What?" Josh said. "Yes, listen to your speaker," Josh said, a voice from Barry's throat that was clearly not Barry's voice. It was a deeper, more echo-filled voice, that sounded as if it were coming from all directions. "Be the lapdog of the council, as Turoks have always been," continued the voice. "Don't think for yourself. They wouldn't like that." "What's happening to Barry?" Allison asked, fear filling her voice. Primogen must have sensed that Barry had been seriously drained by the battle in the Flesh Eater's Mountain, far more than the rest of us, Ardorn whispered to Allison, as Josh tried to move around to Barry /Primogen's blind side. While the transformation seemed to be imparting Primogen's power onto Barry, Josh hoped that he might be able to surprise him if he could get close enough. He's used his powerful mind to take over Barry's body. He's inside Barry's head. Allison whispered back. "Okay, is anyone else totally skeeved out?" "It is a weak, sniveling body, but it serves my purposes," said Primogen, looking down at Ardorn. With each passing second, more of Barry's physical form disappeared, replaced by the form of Primogen. "And there is no need to whisper. I can sense and hear everything around me. Everything." With that, Primogen fired twin bolts of energy through Barry's outstretched hands. One struck Ardorn, causing her bioelectric circuits to sputter and her holographic image to fade momentarily, immobilizing her. The other bolt headed for Josh, who had circled around behind the alien beast. Josh evaded the blast, leaping into the air in a somersault that carried him right into the hovercraft. Landing and rolling across the floor of the craft, Josh knocked the legs out from under the Barry /Primogen creature, sending him sprawling flat on his back. Springing up, Josh looked across the floor to see that the physical appearance of Barry was now completely gone. The full image of Primogen now stood before him, having completely taken over Barry's body, and was quickly moving toward the plasma rifles sitting on deck. Primogen's forearms and 2 legs were covered with a thick insect-like shell. His 2 upper arms could extend 6 feet out from his body, and had sharp pincer-like claws. A shiny purplish-blue hue radiated from his body, and reflected the yellow light of his lightship. His head seemed to grow right out of his curved back, with no neck, and ended in a narrow, expressionless face. "Turok!" Ardorn shouted. Primogen shot her a look. His energy blast had frozen her in her tracks. His eyes darting back and forth between Primogen and Ardorn, Josh could see from the corner of his vision that the creature had taken one of the plasma rifles in hand, and was pointing it at the force field protecting the cluster of energy totems sitting on the deck of the ship. "Stop him! Kill him!" shouted Ardorn, her voice filled with a commanding tone unlike anything Josh had ever heard from the speaker. "You must kill him before he takes the totems. It's the only way to stop him." Josh swiftly withdrew his tech bow from the light burden, and loaded a translucent blue neuropathic tech arrow. "I can't kill Barry," he said. "He's my best friend." "That is exactly what Primogen is counting on, Turok," replied Ardorn forcefully. "If you don't kill him, then he will win, and Barry will die, anyway. We'll all die, everyone here, everyone on Earth. Everyone you have ever known or loved. All life will end. You have to kill him, Turok. It's the only way." "Choom!" echoed the recoil from the plasma rifle, as Primogen fired blast after blast at the energy barrier Ardorn had erected around the totems. The craft bucked and heaved with each blast. The energy barrier held, for the moment. "Josh," Ardorn said in a calm voice. Josh looked at her. It was the first time she had ever called him anything aside from Turok, or Protector of Earth. Her eyes locked with his, energy coursing around her, still unable to move. "I can't maintain the barrier forever in my weakened state. You must kill him. It is the only way." Josh looked from Allison, who was frozen in fear and confusion, to Primogen, whose blasts were starting to have an effect on the energy shield, and finally to his tech bow. "Protector of Earth," he reminded himself. Concentrating, Josh gripped the tech arrow tightly, its color fluctuating from blue to green to red. He knew by this time that the blue neuropathic arrows could do more than just disrupt its victim's senses. Properly focused, the Turok wielding the tech bow could manipulate the energies channeled through the arrows to stun, cripple, or kill. Loading the red arrow, he raised the bow and aimed it at the figure who only moments before had been his friend. Time froze. The muscles of Josh's bow arm knotted and shook. Memories flooded back. Josh and Barry riding their first bikes together, falling over and skinning their knees. Protector of Earth. The day of Josh's first big baseball game in junior high, his father nowhere to be seen, but Barry right there, a one-man cheering section, screaming louder than anyone else in the stands. Defender of the lost land. The day Uncle Carl died, and Josh received the light burden, and how Barry tried to help him figure out how it worked. The Turok. The mantle. The burden. The council of voices, showing him the end of all life across all universes if Primogen were to win, and how the lives of all living creatures depended on him. Warrior of the Sarquin Nation. Barry hanging upside down over the campaigner's arena, condemned to die, risking his life time and again to help him. Then Ardorn's voice said, "It is absolutely the only way." Josh lowered the bow. "I can't do it," he said, sighing sadly. "I can't kill my best friend." "And that is why you will lose," said Primogen. A laugh, more like the rattle of a dead thing shaking free of a centuries-old grave, shuddered out of Barry's chest, as Primogen pointed the rifle at the deck of the hovercraft and fired another plasma blast at the energy shield. The energy shield buckled, then collapsed. Primogen threw down his rifle and raised his fists into the air. A hole opened in the sky right above his head. Tornado force winds pulled the three totems from the deck of the hovercraft and sucked them into the hole in the sky. "I am free," a voice echoed all around them, from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. With a thunderclap, the hole slammed shut. The sky cleared, and the howling winds died down. Josh looked over at Barry, who was lying still on the ground. Making his way over to the body, which once again looked like Barry, Josh helped his friend sit up. Barry looked at Josh, then around at the wreckage. Confusion filled his eyes. Allison rushed over and rested a hand on Josh's back as Josh looked over at Ardorn. She was staring at the spot in the sky where the last three totems had just disappeared. Chapter 9. Crickets chirped, frogs croaked, and the cool night breeze whispered through the tree branches. These sounds, along with the constant crackle of the campfire, were the only sounds filling the silence. No one had spoken a word since the totems had disappeared 4 hours earlier. "Somebody say something," Allison finally said. Even the crickets fell silent as the others around the campfire shot her nasty looks. "Okay, don't talk," she commented, tossing the twig with which she had been poking the ground into the campfire. "What's to say?" Barry said, standing up and tossing his jacket, one of the few things he was able to salvage from his transformation, off his shoulders. "I turn into Linda Blair from The Exorcist, and now the world, the whole universe, every universe everywhere, is going to die. And the strange thing is, I don't even remember it happening. I had a terrible headache, and the next thing I knew, I was lying on the ground, and the totems, not to mention the hovercraft, are destroyed." "Don't be hard on yourself," Barry said. Ardorn, who was sitting on a rock. She placed a comforting hand on his arm. "I should have anticipated that Primogen would make a bid for the totems we had rescued. I let my pride as speaker cloud the wisdom the council has given me." Well, began Allison, kicking a clump of dirt into the fire, if I had done more than just stand there and stare like a statue, I could have helped you stop him, Ardorn. Stop it, shouted Josh. The others turned to face Josh, who was still sitting with his knees pulled up close to his chest. The light burden sat on the ground just in front of him, its black hourglass infinity emblem staring up at him. Sorry, Josh, said Allison. It's just that. Don't say you're sorry, Ali, Josh grumbled, still obviously angry, but trying not to take it out on her. None of you have anything to be sorry about. I dropped the ball here. I am supposed to be Turok. I guess I never really knew what that meant. Maybe I'm more like my father than I care to admit. I chose my friend's life over the lives of every living thing in the universe, and now we're all going to die. So don't say you're sorry. But we have to try and do something, said Barry. I don't know about the rest of you, Josh said, picking up the light burden and hugging it to his chest, but I know what I'm going to do. Go to sleep, and hope that there is a tomorrow to wake up to. Josh rolled over, his back to the campfire. He sighed as his friends watched in silence. Ardorn started to move toward him, opening her mouth to speak, when Allison placed a hand on her arm, shaking her head. Quietly agreeing that perhaps it might be best to leave him alone, the others lay down for the night as well. Before long, Josh fell into a deep sleep. Wake up, soldier. Josh heard the startling order barked at him by a gruff voice. It felt as if a kick from a hard, army-booted foot had slammed into his side. Sitting bolt upright, Josh looked around. He was no longer at the campsite, and his sister and friends were gone. While he had never been here before, he somehow knew where here was. This glade was the gathering place, where, through the cross-time nature of the Lost Land, he could meet the Turoks of all ages, both past and future. Standing around him were Sergeant Turok, the war slave, a soldier in World War II, Eunuch, the Fragment Son, a descendant of Josh from the year 3030, who was more machine than human, his limbs replaced by cybernetic extensions, his torso connected to his legs by a magnetic energy barrier, Talset, the valiant one, who fought for freedom in the time of the American Civil War, and even Josh's uncle, Carl Firezid, the secondary, whose recent death seemed to have no meaning out here in the time crossed expanse of the Lost Land. There were other Turoks present, as well. Most he didn't recognize other than the fact that they were all wearing the same breastplate as he, and each carrying their own light burden. Josh knew this was no dream. Looking to his side, he saw that his light burden was open. He must have opened it in his sleep, and willed himself here. "Why have you called this gathering, Josh?" asked Carl. "You should be back in the Lost Land, stopping Primogen. He cannot be allowed to start his light ship." "I've failed, Uncle Carl," said Josh. "You never should have given me this light burden. My mistakes are going to lead to the destruction of everything." "No, Joshua Firezid," said Talset, stepping forward. He reached into the light burden and pulled out 2 owl feathers. Your loss of the totems may have strengthened Primogen, but you can still stop him. You have to believe in yourself, and believe in the power of the light burden. It can help you. You speak of it as if it were alive, as well as Ardorn did back at the River of Souls, said Josh. Why does everyone think this bag is so important? Talset reached forward and placed one of the feathers in Josh's bandana. Josh's vision blurred for a moment, then snapped back to crystal clarity. He was still in the glade of the gathering, but between each of his fellow Turoks he could see Primogen, young and tall, standing at the controls of his light ship. What am I seeing? Owls, of all birds, have eyes that look forward, as humans do, said Talset, placing the other feather in his own headband. But they can also see at night, see behind themselves. They can see where they have come, and see far into where they are going. They see all aspects of their world. You must learn to look at your world with new eyes. What you see is Primogen's ship, at the point when he attempted to see the beginning of time. It was this journey of folly and brashness that ripped a hole in space, and helped create the Lost Land. The energy released by his journey drew pieces of all worlds to his ship, forming the Lost Land. When Palsegnasarquin, our ancestor, the first Turok, found a piece of this same energy encased in amber, he placed it into the light burden. The energy in the light burden is energy that touches all universes at the same time. Since his foolhardy journey, Primogen has wanted to return to a home that no longer exists. He deludes himself into believing that such a trip is possible, but it is not. His attempt, should he try it, will spell the end of everything. But how do I fight someone who believes so strongly that this impossible journey can be completed? Asked Josh, struggling to understand, searching for an answer. He'll destroy the Lost Land, Earth, everything, for nothing. But I can't stop him. To stop him, you have to not fight him, replied Eunuch. To win, you have to help him, give him what he wants. What do you mean? Asked Josh. If I help him start the light ship, the energy will destroy the Lost Land, and everything else with it. You already know how in your heart, said Carl, as the light around him and the other Turoks began to fade. Josh could feel himself slipping away, back to the world of the Lost Land. Learn to see the light with new eyes, nephew. We're all depending on you. Josh opened his eyes to a rumbling that was shaking the ground. Josh! Wake up! Allison yelled, running across the campground. How could you sleep during an earthquake? Earthquake, said Josh, sitting up and looking at his light burden. The flap was still open. Flipping it shut, he slung the strap over his shoulder, and stood up. He realized that his physical body had disappeared into the satchel during the gathering of Turoks. Looking around, squinting against the daylight, he could see what looked like a rip in a sheet, crossing the sky to the north. Where just the night before, there were trees, a waterfall, and a mountain range in the distance, now there was nothing, not even the blue sky or clouds. Stars and swirling cosmic dust raged in its place, held at bay as if Josh were looking out at the heavens through a window into space. What's happening? The end has begun, said Ardorn. With the master energy sources from the totems, Primogen has begun to pull in all of the energy of the lost land. He intends to use it to fuel his light ship. But with its energy being channeled into the ship, the lost land is ripping apart at the seams. As this place collapses, it will become a massive black hole, consuming everything and all the places throughout all the universes that the lost land touches. Nothing will be able to escape its pull. Another tremor shook the ground, uprooting trees and setting boulders to rolling down the side of the cliff near the campsite. Dodging falling rocks and flaming clumps of earth coughed up by volcanic splits in the earth, the four travelers hid beneath the stone overhang. Josh, lost in thought, looked at the light burden. The energy in the light burden is energy that touches all universes at the same time. Talset's voice came back to Josh. He repeated the phrase out loud. Galiana to Josh. Come in, Josh, said Barry, nervously patting out the cinders of flaming earth that were burning through his pant legs. What are you talking about, bud? Learn to see the light with new eyes, he said, new eyes. I know what I have to do now. Josh screamed. I have to stop Primogen. Running like a man possessed, Josh dashed out from under the overhang and started off into the woods. Where are you going? Shouted Ardorn. To Primogen's light ship, replied Josh. I have to stop him. And somehow I think I know what must be done. Well, we're coming, too, said Allison, stepping forward. No, yelled Josh, stopping. Facing his friends, he tried to be calm. No, this is something I have to do alone, that only Turok can do. It's because of the Firezid family that Earth is connected to the Lost Land, and I have to defend it. Hey, I'm a Firezid, too, Josh, replied Allison angrily. You have to let me help. You are helping, by staying here and being safe, shot back Josh. Trust me, Ali. This is something I have to do. For all of us, for Dad. Josh looked at Ardorn. You understand, don't you? Ardorn looked at Josh, sensing a new confidence within him that she had not seen before. I understand, she said calmly. Allison looked from Josh to Ardorn, then back to Josh again. Running from under the shelter, she threw her arms around her brother. Well, I don't understand, said Allison, tears forming in the corners of her eyes. Not totally, but I trust you. Just don't get yourself killed out there. Not in my plan, he said, hugging her back. Keep an eye on Barry. Then he turned to his friend, keep an eye on Allison. Looking over to Ardorn, Josh was silent. Ardorn also did not speak. What they had to say to each other, both already knew. Tightening the light burden across his chest, Turok ran off into the woods toward Primogen's light ship. Chapter 10. I'm going to Primogen's light ship, I say to them all. Like I know where it is, Josh muttered to himself as he ran through the woods. He had a feeling that the best course to the ship lay in the direction of the most destruction, but he was not sure. 300-foot-tall sequoia trees filled the land ahead, their trunks as wide as some of the buildings in Oklahoma. He stopped for a moment and looked around. One direction looked pretty much like another out here. How am I going to find Primogen? Thinking back over the lessons he had learned in the gathering place with the other Turoks, Josh remembered something Sergeant Turok had told him. The war slave, Turok in the 1940s, told him of the time when he was lost in the middle of the night, separated from his troops, and that the light burden had guided him back. Josh looked down at the satchel and concentrated. A sensation filled his body, and when he looked up, he saw a path of light emanating from the light burden through the woods, pointing to the north. "Thanks, great-grandfather," he called out as he ran faster than ever before. The rest of his journey took about 5 hours, and as Josh approached the edge of a ravine, he noticed that the sun was going down. Maybe it'll be easier to sneak inside once it's dark, he thought, as he walked slowly. The guiding beam of light had faded from the light burden. The edge of the cliff ahead was in an area more exposed. Exposed, he thought. That means no place to hide. I really hope that Primogen doesn't have any guards posted. Leaning over the edge of the ravine, Josh saw Primogen's ship, and realized that, even in broad daylight, it would be easy to approach. The ship was as large as a city, and had apparently come to a halt nose down in the ground after its fall from space millions of years ago. If the part that was jutting up through the rampant vegetation all around its base was any indication, the ship was the most immense single structure ever constructed by a living being. Plunging his hand into the light burden, Josh withdrew the war blade, a large, extremely sharp weapon carved out of wood, and began hacking through the undergrowth, easing himself down the side of the ravine on a thick tree root as he did. About halfway down, Josh noticed why there were no guards on duty outside the lightship. The entire vessel was surrounded by a ravenous, living, writhing bed of vegetation that consumed anything that came close. "I'm not going to get in this way," he said, lowering the war blade to his side. Almost in automatic response, the flap of the satchel popped open, and out leaped the spirit grapple. "Talk about reading my mind," Josh said, feeling more connected to the light burden than he ever had. He grabbed the stout end of the grappling hook, and swung his arm around in a wide arc. Having built up enough momentum, Josh let the grapple fly. Bridging the expanse between the ravine wall and the lightship, the grapple wrapped around the ship's tail section. Releasing his grip on the tree root, Josh slid along the wire of the spirit grapple and glided across to the lightship. No door," Josh said, clambering around the side of the upturned ship. Another earthquake shook the land, causing a cascade of boulders to rain down the sides of the ravine. From the light burden, Josh removed several round explosive charges with suction devices on their bottoms. Clamping 3 devices to a venting panel, Josh punched the timer and ran to the other side of the ship's jet exhaust tower. The explosion shook the entire ship, causing huge boulders to fall. Josh counted on these boulders to keep the guards inside, and to divert Primogen from realizing he was trying to invade his compound. Circling back around to the exposed side of the ship, Josh entered through the now gaping hole in the hull. He could hear the piercing wail of the security alarm that had been triggered by the explosion. So much for the element of surprise, Josh thought with a chuckle. Once inside, the beam of light from the light burden reappeared. "Lead the way," then Josh said, hoping the bag's instincts were better than his. Rounding a corner, Josh came up short, finding himself face to face with a battalion of Primogen's soldiers. A cross-section of creatures from the Lost Land, the troop was made up of a Raptoid, a Fireborn, and a trio of flesh-eater Death Guards. Wonderful, thought Josh, the gang's all here. He snapped his head forward to flip the folding eye into place, just in case he had to evade them by stepping through a fold gate. Plunging both hands into the light burden as he ran forward, Josh was happy that Allison and Barry weren't with him. Without the worries of trying to protect them, he would be free to focus all his attention on fighting Primogen's soldiers. The first to move toward him was the Fireborn, swiping out at him with a lizard-like talon. Before it could reach him, Josh had already withdrawn his hands from the light burden, a firestorm cannon in his left hand, a double-headed talon blade strapped to his right. Passing beneath the Fireborn's reach, he sliced its side open, spilling lava like blood across the hallway floor. The creature's blood began to eat a hole in the floor as Josh pivoted in midair, firing a series of blasts at the Fireborn from the firestorm cannon. The recoil from the cannon not only knocked Josh clear of the raging hot blood, but knocked the Fireborn into the lead flesh-eater Death Guard. The scream of the Fireborn was drowned out by the wail of the Death Guard, whose flesh was eaten from his bones by the Fireborn's boiling blood. "Gross," said Josh as he landed and rolled to a stop. He sat up, just as 4 spiked blades impaled themselves in the floor next to where his head had been a second earlier. Looking up, he saw the second and third Death Guards standing ready to attack. Their speed was greater than he would have thought at first. They raced across the hallway and landed on top of him in a blur of motion. Josh was able to avoid immediate harm thanks to the mystical enchantment of the breastplate he wore, but he knew at such close quarters it was only a matter of time before the Death Guards would do some real damage. He reached into the light burden and found a small disc, which he hid in the palm of his hand. "Die, Turok," the lead Death Guard said. "Bringing your head back to Primogen will win me much glory in his armies." "Don't go counting on that glory just yet," Ugly Josh said, ramming a knee into the creature's chest and flipping him up and over his head. The Death Guard landed with a thud on his back, quickly flipping over, getting to his feet, and charging back at Josh. With the leverage that getting one of the Death Guards off his chest gave him, Josh was able to roll the other one to his side, dragging them both into a fold gate opening, made visible by his folding eye. Reappearing halfway down the hallway, through another opening, Josh then slapped the small disc he had been hiding onto the chest of the second Death Guard. A slicing sound filled the air as a series of barb-tipped wires ejected from the disc, forming a restraining net around the guard, pinning him to the wall. "Try not to mess up the hall too much with your bleeding," said Josh, as he stepped back through the fold gate. The guard, not knowing what Josh meant, struggled against the net until he heard a rhythmic beeping. Looking down, he saw that on the face of the disc was an explosive charge, with a counter that read 3, 2. Blam! A huge blast shook the hall as Josh reappeared from the fold gate behind the other soldiers. The killing of the Death Guard was not anything Josh wanted to do, but there was too much at stake now to risk not getting to Primogen before he was able to power up the ship. Fweet, he whistled, making the soldiers spin around. Looking for me? You killed my brother, said the first Death Guard. Your heart will bleed in my hand for that. I'll take a rain check if you don't mind, Josh said as he stepped backward, not wanting to turn his attention from the three beasts in front of him. The Raptoid had yet to make a move, and Josh was more worried about that beast than the remaining Death Guard or the wounded Fireborn, who was now on his feet again, clutching his side to cover his gaping wound. The floor sloped behind Josh as the corridor curved, and as the guards slowly stalked toward him, the Raptoid smiled. We know these halls better than you do, Turok. There's no getting out. Who said anything about getting out? Josh said, looking up at the ceiling of the corridor. I'd better be where I'm supposed to be, he thought. Aiming at the ceiling with the firestorm cannon at the metal plating overhead, Josh fired until it caved in. He knew that the rubble would not hold them for long, but he hoped that what was on the other side would. Tendrils of green vines snaked down through the gaping hole as the flesh-eating plants, drawn by the smell of roasting flesh and the Fireborn's blood, groped about for food. Arrgh! The creatures screamed, as Josh watched the vines engulf each of the soldiers. Stepping away from the carnage, Josh started down the hall, when a battle cry, more growl than words, filled his ears. He hardly had time to turn when the Raptoid was on him. Missing an arm, the creature slammed Josh to the wall, knocking the firestorm cannon from his hand. Using the talon still strapped to his other wrist, Josh tried to gouge the monster, but couldn't get a good hook into him. The Raptoid's fangs raked a chunk out of Josh's shoulder, its saliva stinging as it mixed with Josh's blood. Almost instinctively, Josh rolled to the side and stepped through a fold gate on the wall next to him, dragging the Raptoid with him. Off balance, Josh stumbled backward into the netherscape, then toppled back into the ship's hallway through another gate 5 feet away. Sitting up, Josh realized that the Raptoid was gone. Looking around, his eyes fell on the spot where they were struggling. Jutting halfway out of the wall, trapped in between this dimension and the netherscape, was the lower half of the Raptoid, who was caught when the fold gate closed, sliced open by the closing of the energy posts. Its legs twitched for a moment, then a mass of Raptoid flesh dropped to the ground, blood and intestines spilling across the floor. Josh backed away from the plants munching on the other soldiers, and continued down the hall into the center of the ship. The inverted ship was overflowing with dinosaurs of every tribe and species. As Josh made his way through battle after battle, he wondered if their fighting skills were getting worse, or if he was just getting better at killing. And he wondered if it were true that he was getting better at killing. Did that make him a better Turok? After 2 hours of fighting for his life, he had lost count of how many dinosaurs he had killed. As the tug of the light burden guided him, he tried to fill his thoughts with the goal of finding Primogen. The gash on Josh's shoulder inflicted by the Raptoid hurt less as he moved, the cuts and wounds he'd gotten in the last few battles making it pale by comparison. What didn't pale was the image of the legs and the guts of the Raptoid falling to the ground. He wondered how his uncle had been able to do all the things he'd heard stories about, how the Firezid men could have been Turok for generation after uncounted generation over the thousands of years that the Lost Land had been in existence. His father's disappearance and his uncle Carl's untimely death left him with more questions than answers, but what he did know was that the sight of that dead creature's body lying there was going to stay with him for a long time. Kill Barry, save the world, Josh thought. Kill a Raptoid, save the world. Kill Primogen, save the world. There has to be another way to save the world. His thoughts were interrupted by an urgent vibrating that shook the light burden. Looking down, he saw that the guiding beam of light had returned and was shining on a doorway not 20 feet away. Stepping up to the door, Josh pressed an ear to the cool metal and tried to hear if there was anything beyond. A sliding mechanical ratcheting sound skittered on the other side, then fell silent. Josh waited another minute. He withdrew a Mag.60 heavy pistol from the light burden and, after checking its ammo clip, kicked the door open. No sooner had the door opened than a spider-legged biobot dropped from the ceiling of the small, closet-sized room. Pincer-like claws slammed into Josh, pinning him to the floor. One of the spider legs drilled into the fleshy part of his shoulder, the wrenching pain numbing his arm and most of his left side. Unlike the other creatures Josh had just fought, this beast couldn't speak, at least not any language he understood. Insectoid chatter clicked in his ears, as the bug's robotic upper body dripped thick sour fluid into his eyes. The creature's mouth began to spew a web across Josh's face, as he pivoted on his hip, and hooked a foot under the robotic body of the creature. Slamming it against the rear wall of the closet, Josh emptied the clip of the Mag.60 into the crunchy mass. Without an organic head guiding it, the robotic body stopped moving, its gears grinding to a halt. The rear wall of the closet was covered in spattered insect goo, as Josh sat up. "I hate insects," he said, wiping the webbing from his face. "I wonder why the light burden thought Primogen was this way?" He thought, marveling at how he was beginning to think of the bag almost as a person. Then the rear wall of the closet slid aside, revealing a massive control room. The room was deep and wide, almost the size of an entire city block. While the rest of the ship was oddly inverted from its upside-down landing, the newly revealed room was somehow right-side up. What Josh assumed to be computers, though they looked like no computers he had ever seen before, hummed in the distance. Well lit and clean, this room seemed untouched by the forces that had ravaged the rest of the lightship. Josh was about to step further into the room when he looked to his left and saw a huge, towering figure sitting in a massive steel and chrome-plated chair. This creature looked like a larger version of the thing that Barry had been transformed into on the hovercraft. As a tremor from the earthquakes outside shook the light ship, Josh gripped the strap of the light burden tightly to his chest. There is no doubt in his mind about this being. The time had finally arrived. Chapter 11. Primogen stood, and Josh was amazed at just how tall he was. Josh guessed he might have been well over 8 feet. The next thing he noticed was the fact that Primogen was not completely there. Staring directly at him, Josh could not only see through Primogen, but he could see other parts of the ship, places in the lost land, and even glimpses of what seemed to be Earth. It was as if this being, this threat to all that was, and his entire light ship were in a constant state of flux. Joshua Fireseed. Turok. I have been looking forward to seeing you again, said Primogen in the same voice that had come out of Barry's mouth at the hovercraft. Again? Asked Josh. When was our first meeting? Unless you're talking about the time we met when you so rudely borrowed my best bud's body to steal the totems. That is correct, replied Primogen. That is, if you simply view time as moving one step after another, forward. I no longer see time quite that way. What is the past for you, or what you think may come tomorrow, all happen at the same time for me. We have been here before. In fact, you're about to say. Head games won't keep me from stopping you, said Josh, hearing an echo that he realized was Primogen saying the exact same words with him, parroting his speech, even mimicking the way he moved his arms when he spoke. Stop that, they both said in unison. Cut it out. Yes, Primogen said, turning back to the controls of his ship. Very few things change. We always get to this point, no further. But I can sense that this time there will be a shift in the order of things. The future is not set now. It is not occurring simultaneously with the past for me as we speak. This time around you are different. No matter. I will start my light ship this time, and there is nothing you can do to stop me. Josh reached into the light burden and pulled out a plasma cannon. He aimed it at the main console next to Primogen, hoping that by disrupting the controls he might be able to disable the ship. Josh pulled the trigger, and found himself standing back at the doorway of the control room, watching himself speak to Primogen, saying the same words he had just said. What? He gasped in a hushed voice. Time is a circle, young Turok, said Primogen, as he turned and walked back to his console again, the previous Josh vanishing as the new Josh stepped into his place. Time bends in on itself like a figure 8, round and round into infinity. Start one place in this ship, wind up right back where you began. Imagine being trapped in here like that for millions and millions of years. It would make you insane. But that all stops today. Josh tried time and time again to stop Primogen, reaching into the light burden and withdrawing any number of weapons, but each time, finding himself back at the doorway to the control room, starting over. None of which had any effect. Finally, drained, he looked around as shifting paths of time rippled through the control room. The Turok eunuch had said, to stop Primogen, You have to not fight him, Josh remembered, closing the light burden. A tremor shook the light ship, and a far wall winked out of existence, exposing another area of star-filled airless space. What else did they say? To win, you have to help him, give him what he wants. And then the phrase that had first given Josh the feeling he could stop Primogen returned to his mind. The energy in the light burden is energy that touches all universes at the same time. Josh looked at the light burden, hoping for some kind of inspiration. He found it in the two black triangles on the bags outside, the two black triangles shaped like a figure 8. Primogen! Josh shouted. Listen to me. You've captured all the energy totems, but there is no guarantee that by using their energy to power your light ship, you'll return through time to your universe at the point you left, millions of years ago. There is another way home. I have a way that's sure to work. This is something new, Primogen said, looking up from his console. We have not had this conversation before. Turning to face Josh, he asked, what way home are you referring to? The only thing left of that time, of your universe, is right here, Josh said, patting the light burden. The energy pocket held in this satchel touches all universes. That includes yours. You lie. Nothing of my world exists here, shouted Primogen. Judge for yourself, said Josh as he opened the flap of the light burden. What streamed out could not exactly be called light, nor could it accurately be called energy or radiation, but it had a radiance, a spirit, all its own. Take a whiff, big guy. Home sweet home. You can almost smell the apple pie cooling on the window ledge. Or whatever you guys put your pies on. Primogen extended an energy tentacle. It mingled with the radiance coming from the light burden, then it entered the bag. Your choice, Primogen, Josh said, brimming with the confidence of a Turok. You can power up your light ship, and destroy the lost land, and everything else, and go forward into the unknown, or you can enter the light burden, and go back home to the one part of your world that is still real. Step in and you'll be home in time for supper. Primogen stood silently for a moment, not moving. Josh started to close the flap of the light burden, when the alien traveler held up a hand. Taking a moment to look from the light burden to the console, and back again, Primogen lowered his head, and let out an unearthly howl. The light ship shook, but not from the earthquakes that were ripping the land to pieces outside. Josh watched as Primogen's body split and ruptured, light erupting through the rifts like lasers darting in all directions. Where once stood solid matter, now stood only a mass of pure energy. It hovered in midair for a moment, then rammed forward, into the light burden. A shockwave enveloped Josh, as the room around him filled with a heat as intense as the sun. As the energy streamed into the light burden, Josh could see the walls of the light ship ebb and flicker, bouncing in and out of existence. The light increased in intensity, flooding the room to a pure white, too bright to see through. Josh squeezed his eyes shut to protect them. A screeching sound filled the air, as the last of the energy that was Primogen raced into the satchel in his hands. It felt as if the weight would rip the light burden from his fingers. Then, nothing. Silence. Josh slowly opened his eyes to find himself standing alone in the center of the ravine, Primogen's ship having vanished. Looking down, he peered into the light burden. It was empty. Chapter 12. And after that, he was just gone, Josh explained to his astonished comrades. Amazing, Allison said, a smile beaming on her face. The smile dropped away, and she began to beat on her brother's chest with clenched fists. But I could kill you for walking off on us like that. You had me scared half to death. You and me both, said Josh. But I had to, you understand. Allison smiled again, lightly punching him in the chest. I guess so. Turok. So he's in there, she asked for the 5th time since Josh had returned, pointing at the satchel. He's in the light burden. Yeah, Josh said, thinking about how much more of a burden the bag was now. In avenging his Uncle Carl, he finally began to understand what a heavy responsibility the light burden could be. But he also realized that he would never have to carry it alone. All of the Turoks who ever were, and ever will be, would always be with him, there to help him shoulder the load. What he didn't tell Allison, or anyone, was that for a brief moment, before the light flooded the room to the point when he couldn't see anything, he thought he saw something, or someone. Someone who looked a lot like his father. He was smiling. Then the image was gone, just as quickly as it had appeared, swallowed up by the infinite expanses within the bag around his neck. Do you think he made it home? Asked Barry. I mean, if the energy in the bag really does touch all universes, who's to say that it didn't touch Primogen's, and send him back there? Kind of like a living fax. Maybe he did get home, replied Josh. Or maybe he's still in here, he added, glancing again into the empty-looking bag. Still, began Barry, wherever he went, we beat him. We really beat him and saved Earth, and everything else. We beat him? Asked Josh. Well, aside from getting kidnapped and being possessed by Primogen, and trying to kill everyone and blow up the universe, I was a little help, wasn't I? Asked Barry. I mean, like. Josh laughed and slapped Barry on the back. I'm kidding, bud. I couldn't have done it without you. Without all of you. Turok may have defeated Primogen, but you helped me find in myself the Turok I had to become. End of mushy speech. Josh noticed that Ardorn was standing a bit away from the others. Ardorn, is everything okay? Ardorn resisted looking Josh in the eyes at first, then finally met his glance. I am fine, she replied nervously. I have something to admit, Turok. When our journey began, I doubted you. I did not think you worthy to be Turok. I judged you before you had a chance to prove yourself, and I saw you as a danger, as a failure, just as the Forsaken One, your father, had been. I am ashamed, as the voice of the Council, and as your friend. Hey, Josh said, placing his hand on her shoulder, listen, I wasn't Turok when this began. You had every right to be suspicious. But you stood by me. That's what we call teamwork back home. I owe you more than I can ever repay. Ardorn looked up at Josh and smiled. Wily, resourceful, quick, dangerous in a tight corner, loyal to the end, and good with the game on the line. You are now truly Turok. Well, Allison said, throwing an arm around Josh and Ardorn, we swam across a cursed river, faced bands of evolved dinosaurs, were almost chopped up into little pieces by the campaigner, you walked through an erupting volcano, I came back from the dead, and we still somehow saved all of the known universe, all while watching my big brother become a man. Not a bad bit of work, but I do have just one question, oh mighty Turok. Yes, my loyal subject, Josh said sarcastically as he and his friends began the long journey back to the safe lands. Pointing to the light burden, Allison said, with all you've learned, and with all that you have done, with all of your great knowledge, isn't it time you tried to get us home? Oops, Josh said, smiling sheepishly and searching around the light burden. I knew there was something I forgot.